Hi guys. Tonight we ease into a rain-soaked world where the sky seems determined to pull every cloud down onto your shoulders. You step into the year 1315, and the moment you do, the air changes. It grows heavier, wetter, like a wool blanket dipped in river water and draped across your entire body. You can almost hear the patter of endless droplets sliding off thatched roofs and hitting the mud outside your door. And now, as the swamp settles completely, you follow it into its quiet morning, slowly, peacefully, and without a single worry tugging at your mind. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you are settling in right now with a cup of something warm, let me know your location and your local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you are listening from. Now, dim the lights, and you slip into the story without needing to brace yourself. The rain is already doing that for you. You trudge along a narrow village path, boots sinking with a gentle squelch into mud that was once solid earth. The rain is not new. It has been here for weeks, maybe months, depending on who you ask. No one remembers the exact moment it shifted from an ordinary wet year to something sinister, but you feel it in your bones. The sun is a vague, ghostly smudge behind a curtain of grey. It offers no warmth. You glance up occasionally, waiting for a break in the clouds, but the sky just broods, thick and swollen, like it wants to collapse onto the world. The fields that usually promise summer growth are ruined. You walk past one and see the stalks leaning sideways in puddles. Some patches look more like rice paddies, except no one here grows rice. A mainstream historical fact drifts through your mind. Chroniclers wrote that 1315 brought some of the worst rainfall in living memory, drenching northern Europe for seasons on end. And as you run your hand along the soggy tops of ruined wheat, you can practically hear those chroniclers muttering warnings that no one at the time seemed prepared for. The smell of rot clings to everything, not the sharp, unpleasant rot of decay, but a dull, earthy version that comes from crops drowning slowly. You feel the ground shift under you, as if the soil itself is exhaling its misery. People walk slower now. They tilt their heads down against the drizzle, as if hoping that a bit of extra cloth or hair or humility might shield them from the sky's relentless mood. Inside the village cottages, things are not much drier. You push open a crooked wooden door and step into a dim interior where smoke has mixed with humidity until the air feels like soup. Someone is trying to coax a fire to life, but the wood refuses to catch. Spark after spark fizzles into steam. The walls are dark from moisture, and the straw mattress in the corner looks like it has absorbed an entire puddle. No matter how many rushes people lay on the floor for cleanliness, the damp always wins. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. People sometimes hung their bread from rafters in desperate hope that the smoke would keep it drier. You look up and see a few pitiful loaves swaying gently from strings, not so much drying as slowly absorbing smoke-flavored humidity. You wonder if they will even be edible in a week. Probably not. But no one has the heart to take them down yet. You step back outside and let the soundscape wash over you. Rain striking thatch. Rain trickling down wooden barrels. Rain tapping on metal buckets left carelessly outside. The entire village is a symphony of dripping. Chickens huddle under eaves with their feathers puffed out, like miserable pom-poms. A dog curls in a doorway, paws tucked beneath its belly, giving you a look that says everything. Even the animals know this is no ordinary season. People cluster in small groups along the path, whispering about the fields. Some say this has happened before, hundreds of years earlier, though no one remembers exactly when. Historians still argue whether the climate shift of the early 14th century was caused by volcanic activity, a natural cooling period, or some strange combination of forces. You pull your cloak tighter and consider how these people, standing ankle-deep in mud, have no idea they are living through the start of what many will someday call a crisis. A farmer approaches you, balancing a broken hoe over his shoulder. His beard is soaked. His tunic clings to him like wet parchment. He tells you in a tired voice that he tried digging drainage channels around his field. You nod, even though you already know how this story ends. The channels overflowed, the water refused to leave, and now the field is ruined. He shrugs in resignation, but his eyes flicker with fear. You sense that fear everywhere, tucked behind polite greetings and attempts at casual conversation. You wander toward the village outskirts where the rolling hills should offer relief, but instead you find them stripped bare. Hillsides collapse in chunks from the constant rainfall. Dirt slides downward in slow, sticky waves that swallow fences and small sheds. Someone's goat pen now sits halfway down. An unexpected little landslide, its posts askew and its roof caved in. You pause, letting the breeze push strands of wet hair against your cheek. This land feels tired, overworked, and saturated beyond reason. As you press onward, you begin to notice something else. The rain has changed the smell of people too. Clothing grows moldy. Boots smell like stagnant ponds. Hair clings to faces, damp and slightly sour. You catch a few glimpses of villagers scratching at patches of irritated skin where moisture has caused rashes. A few women mutter about herbal remedies that might help, though their herbs are soaked as well, losing much of their potency. Night comes early under this heavy sky. You barely notice the shift except for the soft darkening of the clouds and the deeper chill creeping into your fingertips. When the villagers pull shutters closed, the creaking wood sounds resigned, as if it has performed this motion far too many times lately. Inside, candles sputter, wicks struggle. Shadows stretch long and uncertain across dirt floors. The world outside your door turns utterly silent except for the rainfall, which you almost expect by now. You settle down on a rough stool, feeling the damp wind sneak through a crack in the wall. You imagine the entire continent wrapped in the same wet blanket. And as you close your eyes for a moment, listening to the endless dripping, you can sense the early seeds of fear settling into everyone's thoughts. Because if the fields cannot dry, the harvest cannot grow. And if the harvest fails, life becomes something far more fragile than anyone wants to admit. Tomorrow will be wetter, you already know that. The sky gives no sign of mercy, but you also know this is just the beginning of what will become a long and painful story. For now, you breathe softly. Let the sound of the rain surround you, and accept that you are stepping into a world sliding quietly toward hunger. You wake to a pale grey morning that looks almost identical to the one before it. The air feels heavier somehow, as if the night added another layer of moisture onto everything you own. Your cloak is colder now. The fabric clings to you with a persistent cling that makes you wonder whether it will ever fully dry again. When you step outside, the ground greets you with a soft sucking sound, your boot pulling free only after a reluctant pause. You take a few slow breaths, letting the stillness of the early hour sink into your bones. The rain has stopped for the moment, though the sky continues to brood with the same swollen intensity. The pause should feel like relief. Instead, it feels like suspense, as if the sky is reloading. You wander past a small smithy where a horse stands tied under a sagging awning. Its ribs show faintly, the dampness giving its coat a dull, matted sheen. Its owner runs a hand along its flank, muttering about feed costs. He gives you a strained smile that does not reach his eyes. Even the animals sense the shift. The sound of their anxious movements blends with the pattering of rain on mismatched metal scraps scattered across the ground. A mainstream historical fact settles into your thoughts while you watch the village stir. Chroniclers of the time recorded that food prices rose dramatically within weeks of the rain's beginning, especially grain. Wheat, the backbone of daily life, suddenly became a luxury. You see this now as you walk past a cottage where a woman carefully measures flour as though it were powdered gold. Children watch, wide-eyed, hoping for a crumb. The woman does not look at them. If she does, she might give in, and she knows she cannot. You trudge onward, passing a storage hut that should smell of abundance. Instead, it smells faintly musty, as though old sacks of grain have been pushed together in a desperate attempt to hide how little is left. You run your hand over a wooden barrel, feeling how the rain has warped it. A crack runs down its side. Someone has wedged wax into the gap in a hopeful but probably futile attempt to seal it. A quirky detail flickers in your memory. Some villagers, faced with failing cereal crops, began eating things they would normally avoid, including the outer husks of oats or even coarse weeds, once used only for animal fodder. You can almost taste the bitterness on your tongue as you imagine the gritty textures people tried to choke down. Hunger has a way of expanding the definition of food. As you wander toward the village center, you hear the uneasy murmur of neighbors discussing the coming days. Most cling to a cautious optimism that the weather will change soon. It has to change, they insist, as if the sky might overhear their confidence and comply. But you notice something else beneath the hopeful voices. People move differently. Shoulders slump, steps slow. Even the smiles seem thinner, stretched over the edges of apprehension. A young man drags a sack of barley along the path, though you suspect calling it barley might be overly generous. When he opens it for his companion to inspect, you see kernels that are shriveled and discolored. He lets out a sigh that sounds older than he is. You notice the way both men glance around before speaking in hushed tones, as though admitting the truth aloud might cause more bad luck to spill out of the sky. Historians still debate whether the famine's severity came more from environmental disaster or from the fragile economic systems of medieval Europe. You sense that tension in every interaction. These people depend on predictable seasons and stable crops in a way that leaves them with almost no buffer. When the rhythm breaks, their lives begin to unravel. As you step inside a cottage, you hear a low conversation between an older couple. They whisper about their dwindling smoked meat supply. The woman mentions that the last pig they slaughtered tasted strangely watery, likely from months of poor feed and constant rain. You watch her hands worry the edge of her apron as she speaks. She does not want to scare her husband, though you can tell she is more frightened than she lets on. Fear creeps in quietly, the way mist slides under a doorframe. By midday, the rain returns. Not a sudden storm, more like a steady tapping that begins with a few polite drops before growing into something more insistent. You tilt your face upward and feel the drizzle gather in your eyelashes. This used to feel refreshing. Now it feels like a warning. You wander past a small smithy where a horse stands tied under a sagging awning. Its ribs show faintly, the dampness giving its coat a dull, matted sheen. Its owner runs a hand along its flank, muttering about feed costs. He gives you a strained smile that does not reach his eyes. Even the animals sense the shift. The sound of their anxious movements blends with the pattering of rain on mismatched metal scraps scattered across the ground. The village green looks emptier than usual. People stay indoors more often, conserving energy the way they once conserved food. You imagine a future where even venturing outside requires calculation. For now, though, it is simply uncomfortable, not impossible. But the mood has changed. Hunger, once an occasional visitor in winter, is now a looming figure that stands at every doorway. Inside another cottage, a group of villagers sits around a small table. No one eats. They only talk. One mentions hearing of a neighboring village already facing serious shortages. Another insists that merchants from a nearby town have doubled their prices. A third rolls her eyes and suggests these rumors always circulate during hard seasons. But even she grips her cup too tightly. Every conversation circles back to food, or the lack of it. You feel the tension build with each passing hour, like a string being slowly tightened. People are not starving yet, but they are afraid. Hunger begins not in the stomach but in the mind. As evening settles in, you sit near a low fire that struggles to stay lit in the humid air. You close your eyes and listen to the slow crackle of damp wood. The room smells faintly of sour grain and wet wool. Outside, the rain softens, turning into an occasional patter against the roof. The hunger inside you feels small but persistent, a quiet reminder of what is coming. You take a slow breath and accept that this is only the beginning. The world has not collapsed yet, but it is leaning. The first rumblings are here. faint but unmistakable, and you can feel them echoing beneath your ribs. You step into the next morning with a faint sense of unease pressing against your ribs. The rain has paused again, leaving behind an eerie stillness that feels almost unnatural. Fog settles low across the village, curling between cottages and drifting around corners like a cautious visitor. The world seems wrapped in wool. Every sound is softened. Even your footsteps feel quieter, swallowed by the damp earth. As you walk toward the village center, you begin to sense something more than hunger. It is a tension woven into the air itself, stretched between neighbors who used to greet each other warmly. People still nod politely, but the nods come slower. Eyes dart away more quickly. Conversations pause mid-sentence when someone unexpected approaches. You can practically feel the edges of the community fraying. You pass a pair of men arguing under the overhang of a cottage roof. Their voices are low, but sharp. You catch fragments about grain storage, about someone taking more than their share, about suspicions disguised as questions. When they notice you, they both fall silent, offering you quick, brittle smiles before turning away. Even friendliness feels staged now, a thin cloth laid gently over something jagged beneath. A mainstream historical fact flickers into your thoughts while you watch this unfold. Chroniclers noted that during the Great Famine, many communities across northern Europe faced rising disputes over shared resources. Cooperation, which villagers depended on during normal times, began to erode. You see that pattern here, unfolding in real time, as fear coils quietly in the corners of every conversation. You wander toward a small cluster of cottages where women stand near a communal well. Their buckets are wet from the mist, and their faces are pale with exhaustion. They whisper urgently, heads leaning close as if the fog itself might be listening. One glances over her shoulder when you approach, then forces a smile before continuing to lower her bucket. The rope is damp and rough against her hands. You can hear it creak with every tug. They are discussing the flour shortage. You hear the words clearly. Someone claims her neighbor is hoarding extra sacks in a hidden corner of the loft. Another insists the rumor is untrue. A third mutters that in times like these, people do terrible things to protect their own. She looks into the well as she says it, watching her reflection ripple. A quirky little detail returns to you then. In some villages, people began marking their grain sacks with small embroidered symbols or colored knots, so no one could quietly swap them or claim them by mistake. You notice something similar here. A few sacks stored outside one cottage have been tied with bits of dyed cloth. It is a subtle sign that trust is thinning. As you continue walking, you notice how children move differently too. They stick closer to their parents, watching strangers with a wary seriousness that feels far too old for their small faces. When a group of boys play near the edge of the green, their game is quieter than usual. They toss a stick back and forth, but whenever an adult walks by, they pause and look up, as if expecting trouble. You stop near a small garden that normally would be neatly tended. Now it looks neglected, its rows uneven and half submerged in soggy soil. The owner, an elderly man with a stiff posture, stands beside it, staring at the ground with furrowed brows. You ask how he is faring, and he responds with a heavy sigh. He tells you that several neighbors have asked whether he might have extra beans saved from last season. He shrugs, saying he barely has enough for himself. Then he adds more quietly that he wishes he could help. You sense that he truly means it, but fear has begun to weigh down his generosity. Historians still argue whether social tensions during the famine were driven more by desperation or by long-standing local rivalries amplified by hardship. You can see traces of both here. A few feuds that were once small and manageable now grow into something sharper. A woman refuses to speak to a neighbor who failed to lend her a cart last week. A man who once shared apples from his orchard now keeps his gate locked even when he is home. People begin to protect what little they have, convinced that someone might take advantage of them. The priest moves through the village during midday, attempting to soothe the rising tension. His robe clings damply to his legs as he walks. offering blessings and kind words to anyone who will listen. But even he seems strained. You catch him rubbing his temples, muttering to himself before approaching another group of anxious villagers. Spiritual comfort only goes so far when stomachs grow emptier. You make your way to the small commons where several villagers gather around a wooden table. They speak in hushed tones about rationing. One insists that everyone should share equally. Another argues that those with larger families deserve more. A third points out that generosity could lead to theft. Their voices overlap, rising and falling like the uncertain wind. You feel the tension building between them like heat under a kettle lid. Someone suggests looking to the local lord for help. Another scoffs. The lord has his own stores to protect. A murmur of agreement moves through the group, though no one says it too loudly. Criticizing authority can be dangerous, even when the weather itself feels like an enemy. By afternoon, the fog lifts slightly. The world becomes clearer, but not calmer. When you walk past the baker's house, you notice a small crowd gathered near the door. They are not arguing yet, but they stand too close to one another. You hear someone demanding to know who received the last batch of bread. The baker's wife insists there was barely enough flour to make a dozen loaves. A few people mutter skepticism under their breaths. The tension is not explosive, not yet, but it sits there, ready, like a spark waiting for dry tinder. The problem is nothing is dry, not even the tempers. As evening arrives, you settle again inside a cottage, listening to the rain begin its steady tapping on the wooden roof. You hear voices outside, arguing softly. Someone slams a door. Someone else mutters a curse under their breath. The village feels smaller tonight, as if fear has tightened the boundaries of every home. You sit by a weak fire, watching the flames flicker uncertainly in the damp air. The warmth reaches you, but only faintly. You breathe in slowly, letting the day settle over you. Hunger has begun its quiet work, but the deeper shift is happening between the people themselves. Unity is giving way to suspicion. Neighbors are becoming competitors. And you can feel it. The first fragile bonds of community are beginning to stretch and strain under the weight of fear. You step out into a world that feels heavier than the day before, as if the sky has pressed its entire weight onto the land. The rain pauses again, not out of kindness, but out of indecision, leaving behind a wet hush that blankets every path and rooftop. Mist curls along the roads like a wandering spirit, and when you inhale, the air tastes faintly metallic, thick with moisture and the lingering smoke of damp hearth fires. Today, you drag yourself along a road that should connect nearby villages, but it has transformed into a corridor of mud and uncertainty. You sit by a weak fire, watching the flames flicker uncertainly in the damp air. The warmth reaches you, but only faintly. You breathe in slowly, letting the day settle over you. Hunger has begun its quiet work, but the deeper shift is happening between the people themselves. Unity is giving way to suspicion. Neighbors are becoming competitors. You pass a toppled cart half buried in muck. The wooden axle snapped sometime in the night, leaving its cargo exposed. A few broken crates, their contents spoiled by rainwater, lie scattered like abandoned hopes. You crouch beside one and see the remains of salted fish dissolved into a grey, unpleasant paste. A chill crawls up your spine as you realize that what is lost here might have fed an entire household. According to several medieval account books, storms during these years destroyed countless shipments of food, cutting off towns from the trade routes they depended on for survival. A little farther down the path, you encounter a merchant leading a stubborn mule. Both are caked in mud, up to the knees. The merchant mutters curses under his breath, then tries to smile when he notices you watching. His face is gaunt, and the sack slung over his shoulder looks far lighter than a merchant's pack should. He tells you he has turned back from the next town because the bridge crossing the river has collapsed again. He tried to take the longer route, but the road was swallowed by floodwater. His voice trembles with a frustration he barely manages to hide. Inside another cottage, a group of villagers sits around a small table. No one eats. They only talk. One mentions hearing of a neighboring village already facing serious shortages. Another insists that merchants from a nearby town have doubled their prices. A third rolls her eyes and suggests these rumors always circulate during hard seasons. But even she grips her cup too tightly. A mainstream historical fact flickers into your thoughts while you watch this unfold. Chroniclers noted that during the Great Famine, many communities across northern Europe faced rising disputes over shared resources. Cooperation, which villagers depended on during normal times, began to erode. You see that pattern here, unfolding in real time, as fear coils quietly in the corners of every conversation. When the path widens near a small grove, you hear voices drifting through the mist. A group of villagers stands beside a makeshift checkpoint they built from fallen branches and large stones. They stop travelers now, asking questions and checking carts, wanting to know who brings food and who intends to take some away. Suspicion has become a constant companion. A woman with tired eyes waves you over, her hand trembling slightly as she grips a wooden staff. He tried to take the longer route, but the road was swallowed by floodwater. His voice trembles with a frustration he barely manages to hide. She explains that people used to rely on merchants during hard seasons, but now those merchants are trapped by washed-out paths, failing horses, and rumor-filled dangers. Trade has become an unpredictable, fragile thing. A detail recorded in multiple monastic chronicles comes to mind. Many roads linking distant markets became nearly impassable during these years, cutting communities off from the goods they desperately needed. You see the truth of it all around you. As you take your leave from the villagers and continue along the road, you notice how quiet everything feels. Even the birds seem subdued. Their calls are soft, uncertain, as if they too are adjusting to this new rhythm of hardship. You pass a patch of forest that once offered a comfortable shortcut between villages, but now its floor is waterlogged. The normally lively underbrush appears flattened, drowned under the weight of relentless storms. Inside another cottage, a group of villagers sits around a small table. No one eats. They only talk. One mentions hearing of a neighboring village already facing serious shortages. Another insists that merchants from a nearby town have doubled their prices. A third rolls her eyes and suggests these rumors always circulate during hard seasons, but even she grips her cup too tightly. A series of distant shouts interrupts your thoughts. You hurry toward the noise and discover a group of men struggling to pull a wagon from a deep rut. Their boots squish loudly as they tug ropes and push the wheels. The cargo is covered in canvas, tied tightly to protect it. From the size of the wagon, you suspect it contains grain or dried vegetables, something precious enough to risk transporting through this mess. The men grunt and curse as they lean in, mud splattering their legs. A mainstream historical fact flickers into your thoughts while you watch this unfold. Chroniclers noted that during the Great Famine, many communities across northern Europe faced rising disputes over shared resources. Cooperation, which villagers depended on during normal times, began to erode. You see that pattern here, unfolding in real time, as fear coils quietly in the corners of every conversation. A small detail that seldom gets mentioned in popular histories surfaces in your thoughts. Travelers sometimes sprinkled straw or pine needles ahead of their wheels to help create traction in the mud. You notice a few handfuls of flattened straw near the path, evidence of someone trying exactly that trick earlier in the day. It must have helped for a time, though clearly not enough to spare the wagon crew from their muddy ordeal. You continue along the road until you reach a ridge overlooking a broad valley. From here, you can see distant farmsteads clinging to slopes that look more like slipping patchworks than solid land. The river below has swollen far beyond its banks. Fields that were once lush with wheat now resemble oversized puddles reflecting the dismal sky. When you take in the sight, your breath catches for a moment. The scale of destruction is humbling. And yet, according to numerous surviving letters of the era, this scene repeated itself across vast stretches of Europe during these years, a grim pattern etched into every corner of the landscape. As you stand there watching the valley, a wandering peddler joins you on the ridge. He carries no goods anymore, Only an empty pack hangs from his shoulders. He tells you how he tried to reach a coastal town 2 weeks ago, thinking ships might still bring food from far-off regions. But the roads were blocked by floods, and when he finally reached the harbor, he found that storms had battered ships so badly that only a few dared to sail. His voice cracks slightly as he describes seeing several boats flipped on their sides like abandoned toys. He pauses, looking down at the valley with a distant, haunted gaze. Then he tells you something odd. He claims some people now travel with bits of carved wood tied to their belts, shaped like miniature boats or tiny wheels, hoping these charms will protect them from misfortune on the road. It sounds superstitious, but in times like these, small symbols become anchors of comfort. You picture the carved trinkets tapping softly against worn belts as people walk, the quiet rhythm offering a fragile sense of hope. The peddler leaves you with one final whisper. He says the biggest danger on the roads is not the mud or the rain. It is the uncertainty. No one knows which paths remain safe, which bridges still stand, or which villages will greet travelers with hospitality instead of suspicion. Many experts studying this era point out that the breakdown of transportation networks deepened the famine, turning local shortages into widespread catastrophe. As you listen to the peddler's fading footsteps, that interpretation feels painfully real. You make your slow return toward the village as twilight lowers itself over the landscape, cool and bluish. The road glistens like a long strip of tarnished metal. Every puddle reflects the sky's fading light, and the sound of your footsteps echoes softly in the thick evening air. When you reach the village boundary, the first raindrops begin to fall again, gentle yet persistent, as if reminding you that the respite was only temporary. By the time you step inside a cottage for warmth, your cloak is soaked through. You settle by the dim embers of a fire, letting the smell of damp wool fill your senses. Your mind drifts back over the broken roads, the stranded carts, the weary travelers. The world feels larger tonight, stretched out by hardship, yet smaller too, tightened by fear. And as the rain resumes its familiar tapping, you understand the truth settling into everyone's hearts. When the roads crumble, hope travels much more slowly. You wake to another dim morning, but this time something feels different. The village seems quieter, not because of peace, but because of worry settling into every timber and thatched roof. As you step outside, you notice the way people move. Their footsteps feel heavier, their conversations shorter. The air is thick with the scent of wet grass and simmering anxiety. Today, your path pulls you toward the manor on the hill, the place where the local noble family lives behind stone walls that once promised security. A servant enters carrying a tiny platter of cheese that looks more like crumbs pressed together. She hesitates before placing it on the table, as though the act of presenting such a small offering embarrasses her. A noblewoman seated near the hearth gives her a gentle nod, but the sadness in her eyes is unmistakable. This household is struggling to maintain its dignity, even as scarcity tugs at every seam. The wooden gate stands slightly ajar, and two guards lean against the stone archway. Their armor is dull with moisture, patches of rust emerging where rain has seeped too deeply. They greet you with the faintest nod, but their faces betray a strained exhaustion. One scratches at the inside of his glove, complaining quietly about how the damp has given him raw patches on his skin. It is clear that discomfort has reached every rank of society. Inside the courtyard, you witness something unusual. Several kitchen servants carry small bundles of herbs, thin strips of preserved meat, and sacks that look alarmingly light. The kitchen door stands open, and a chilling breeze pushes the scent of weak broth toward you. According to a number of surviving manor records from this era, even noble households saw their food reserves shrink at alarming speed during the first year of the famine. You see proof of that in the tightness of the servants' expressions, each one anxiously guarding even the smallest scrap of supplies. A few moments later, you find yourself near the great hall. Its heavy door creaks loudly as you push it open. The interior is dim, lit only by a few torches that sputter against the damp air. The long dining table, once a place of feasts and comfort, now holds only thin bowls of barley gruel and a few wilted vegetables. The fire in the great hearth burns weakly, struggling to stay alive with the half-soaked logs stacked beside it. The lord of the manor sits at the head of the table. You expect grandeur, but instead you find a man looking older than his years. His eyes hold a weary alertness, as if he has not slept well in weeks. A detail mentioned in several household letters of the time comes to mind. Many nobles quietly cut their own rations so they could maintain the illusion of abundance for their households or loyal guards. You suspect that may be true here, judging by the lord's hollow cheeks and the discreet way he pushes food toward others. Across the room, his steward pores over parchment scrolls filled with numbers, tallying stores of grain, salted fish, dried peas, and whatever else they have left. He frowns deeply, tapping a quill against the wood in a nervous rhythm. When you pass near him, you hear him muttering about how long the supplies might last. His calculations grow more frantic. Each time he repeats the same line of numbers. The truth is clear before he ever says it aloud. Their supplies are not enough. A servant enters carrying a tiny platter of cheese that looks more like crumbs pressed together. She hesitates before placing it on the table, as though the act of presenting such a small offering embarrasses her. A noblewoman seated near the hearth gives her a gentle nod, but the sadness in her eyes is unmistakable. This household is struggling to maintain its dignity, even as scarcity tugs at every seam. Outside the hall, you follow a narrow corridor leading toward the storage rooms. The stone walls drip with moisture, and the sound of water trickling somewhere deep in the foundation echoes faintly. The first storage chamber holds barrels that once brimmed with ale. When you look inside, you find only a few inches left in each one. The brew tastes thin, diluted by necessity. A strange little practice mentioned in some estate journals slips into your mind. A servant enters carrying a tiny platter of cheese that looks more like crumbs pressed together. She hesitates before placing it on the table, as though the act of presenting such a small offering embarrasses her. A noblewoman seated near the hearth gives her a gentle nod, but the sadness in her eyes is unmistakable. This household is struggling to maintain its dignity, even as scarcity tugs at every seam. In the second chamber, you find sacks of grain stacked neatly in rows, though there are far fewer than there should be. A servant standing nearby watches you with guarded suspicion, as though your very gaze might make the grain disappear. You can hear his quiet breaths, short and tense. He knows exactly how precious each sack has become. As you continue exploring the manor, you overhear fragments of tense conversations. A knight complains that his horse has lost weight because there is not enough feed. A lady in a damp wool gown worries aloud about the upcoming winter. A pair of servants whisper about rumors from nearby estates. Some say that in extreme desperation, a few noble families have begun slaughtering draft animals they normally would never consider killing except in the direst circumstances. The servants speak softly, as though the walls themselves might be offended by the admission. At one point, you step into the manor garden. Normally, this would be filled with herbs, lettuces, and brightly coloured flowers. Now, most of the plants have been trampled or drowned. The soil is swampy, and the few surviving herbs cling weakly to life. A gardener kneels in the mud, trying to salvage what he can. He mutters prayers under his breath, asking for sun, for warmth, for mercy. His hands tremble as he weeds around a small patch of struggling leeks. One lingering debate among modern researchers comes to mind. Some scholars argue that noble estates fared only slightly better than peasant households, while others believe the gap in survival was still significant. Witnessing the manor around you, it feels clear that nobility suffered too, albeit in different ways. Their hardship carries the weight of responsibility, the need to maintain authority, and the constant fear of appearing weak in uncertain times. You make your way back toward the great hall. The torches flicker as a draught of cold air creeps through a gap in the stones. The lord rises from his seat, walking slowly along the empty table. His footsteps echo across the hall, each one sounding a little heavier than the last. He pauses by a window slit, staring out toward the flooded fields below. You follow his gaze and feel the sting of the truth settling into every corner of this household. Wealth can buy time, but not salvation. Not when the sky wages war against the earth itself. By evening, you return to the courtyard, watching the servants carry the last scraps of the day's meager meal back to the kitchen. The sun dips behind the hills, casting the estate in a muted blue shadow. You draw your cloak tighter, feeling the damp chill seep deeper into your skin. The manor, once a symbol of strength, now feels like a tired giant struggling to remain upright. As you make your slow descent back toward the village, the sky darkens. A few raindrops fall, each one cold and deliberate. You breathe in the heavy air, knowing that tomorrow will bring even more challenges. Hunger does not care for rank or privilege. It spreads across every threshold, stone or straw alike. And somewhere behind you, the manor doors close with a long, mournful creak, as though the building itself is bracing for what comes next. You rise the next morning to the low rumble of cattle calls, though the sound feels thinner than it should. When you step outside, the air is thick with the scent of damp straw and muddy earth. The village seems strangely hollow today, as if something essential has slipped quietly out of place. You follow the faint echoes of barns opening, aware that you are about to witness a truth everyone here already understands but few dare to speak aloud. The animals are disappearing. You wake to another dim morning, but this time something feels different. The village seems quieter, not because of peace, but because of worry settling into every timber and thatched roof. As you step outside, you notice the way people move. Their footsteps feel heavier, their conversations shorter. The air is thick with the scent of wet grass and simmering anxiety. In one stall, a farmer stands with his head bowed. He is stroking the neck of a cow so thin that its bones show sharply beneath its hide. According to several medieval agricultural accounts, many livestock succumbed to disease and malnutrition during the famine, as feed supplies dwindled. You see that reality in the cow's dim eyes and labored breathing. The farmer gently lifts its head, but it barely responds. His lips move in a quiet prayer, one you sense he has repeated far too often lately. When you step back outside, the mud pulls at your boots, reluctant to release them. You make your way to another byre farther down the path, where a group of villagers stands gathered around an empty enclosure. They speak in low voices, the kind people use when recounting something both shocking and expected. A few shake their heads, others stare blankly at the ground. You learn that 2 sheep vanished during the night. No one saw anything. No one heard a sound. A strange hush falls over the group, thick with uncertainty. A small anecdote seldom mentioned in popular histories comes to mind. In some hard-hit regions, desperate families resorted to hiding their remaining animals in woods or remote sheds, hoping thieves would overlook them. You spot traces of such attempts here. A makeshift enclosure of branches sits hidden behind a thicket, though from the footprints in the mud, it seems someone found it recently. The gate hangs open, the rope snapped by either human hands or hungry wolves drawn too close by the scent of weakness. As you make your slow descent back toward the village, the sky darkens. A few raindrops fall, each one cold and deliberate. You breathe in the heavy air, knowing that tomorrow will bring even more challenges. Hunger does not care for rank or privilege. It spreads across every threshold, stone or straw alike. You ask her whether she has more animals. She gives you a hollow laugh. Only these 3 remain, she says. The rest wasted away, or were sold to traders who promised good prices but likely resold them far from here. She wipes her hands on her apron, leaving streaks of mud that never seem to fade anymore. As you keep moving, the village takes on a strange shape in your mind. The absence of animals is almost louder than their presence once was. No cheerful clucking, no impatient hooves tapping, no rooster crow greeting the dawn with its usual confidence. The silence grows with every step you take. You wake to another dim morning, but this time something feels different. The village seems quieter, not because of peace, but because of worry settling into every timber and thatched roof. As you step outside, you notice the way people move. Their footsteps feel heavier, their conversations shorter. The air is thick with the scent of wet grass and simmering anxiety. One man wipes his eyes with the back of his sleeve before lifting the horse's hoof gently, as if saying goodbye. One historical detail noted in various estate inventories returns to your thoughts. Horses, essential for ploughing and transport, were among the first casualties in bad years because they required large quantities of fodder. You feel the weight of that truth now. This single death represents more than one loss. Without the horse, a field will remain unploughed, a cart will remain still, a family will face a harder season ahead. As you keep moving, the village takes on a strange shape in your mind. The absence of animals is almost louder than their presence once was. No cheerful clucking, no impatient hooves tapping, no rooster crow greeting the dawn with its usual confidence. The silence grows with every step you take. It offered comfort. Now there is only an aching space where its gentle bleating once lived. A troubling question hangs in the air, one that community members whisper among themselves. Are the thieves from neighboring villages or from within their own? Some believe outsiders prowl at night. Others fear their neighbors are succumbing to desperation. Modern scholars continue to study crime patterns from this period, unsure how much livestock loss came from starvation, disease, predators, or theft. As you listen to the couple's hushed voices, it becomes clear that the uncertainty itself is the most painful part. Toward midday, you visit the fields beyond the village where a herdsman usually grazes his cattle. Today, he stands alone against a backdrop of sodden grass. His herd, once sizable, has dwindled to only 2 cows and a calf that struggles to stand on trembling legs. The herdsman watches you approach, then sighs deeply, as though your arrival simply confirms what he already knows. He talks about how, just months ago, he worried about finding enough space for his animals. Now, he worries about keeping the few survivors alive long enough to see another spring. Now, he worries about keeping the few survivors alive long enough to see another spring. He mentions something peculiar. Lately, travelers have reported finding abandoned oxen wandering along flooded roads, too weak to continue and left behind by desperate owners. The herdsman shakes his head at the image. Even the land feels unsteady beneath your feet when he says it. As the day fades and you return to the village, you notice the barns taking on a new appearance. Their doors stay closed longer. Their windows are shuttered tight. You feel the fear settling into wooden beams and nail heads. Livestock are more than animals here. They are survival, wealth, labor, nutrition, and pride, all bound into living bodies. Every disappearance chips away at the village's foundation. You end your day by a small fire, listening to the uneasy quiet beyond the door. Somewhere in the distance, a lone cow moos, the sound thin and wavering. It echoes through the fields like a reminder that life clings stubbornly even when the world feels like it is slipping away. Your breath slows as you settle deeper into the warmth of the fire. You know tomorrow will bring harder truths, but for now, you sit with the silence, feeling the shape of what has been lost. You wake to the faint smell of smoke drifting through the cracks of the cottage door, a smell that should promise breakfast, but now carries a strange, unsettling sharpness. When you step outside, the morning greets you with a chill that settles instantly into your bones. Today, hunger takes on a new shape. It becomes inventive, strange, and sometimes a little desperate, leading people to experiment with foods no one would have considered just a season ago. You walk along the muddy path into the village centre. At first glance, everything looks the same as yesterday. Damp cottages, drooping thatch, thin figures wrapped in worn cloaks. But as you draw closer, you notice something different in the air. A simmering pot sits outside one cottage, sending up a plume of steam that smells oddly sour. A woman stirs it with a long wooden spoon, her face tight with concentration. Your breath slows as you settle deeper into the warmth of the fire. You know tomorrow will bring harder truths, But for now, you sit with the silence, feeling the shape of what has been lost. According to several medieval household accounts, people during these years often resorted to stretching meals with ingredients meant for animals or compost heaps. You see evidence of that everywhere. A family nearby uses dried nettles to thicken a stew. A man tries to bake bread from flour mixed heavily with ground acorns, the resulting dough looking heavy and grey. A young girl sits on a doorstep chewing a piece of bark softened in hot water, her tiny jaw working stubbornly as she tries to convince herself it tastes better than it does. You continue your walk, passing a field where a few pigs wander sluggishly near a sagging fence. Their ribs show, and their snouts sift through the mud with frantic urgency, searching for anything edible. A woman nearby tosses them scraps so small you can barely recognize their original shape. She watches them devour the bits with quiet despair. In the faint morning light, her face looks older than it did yesterday. A peculiar little detail passed down in scattered village tales drifts into your thoughts. In some regions, people boiled leather, belts, shoes, scraps of harness, until it's softened enough to chew. You catch a glimpse of that ritual now. Behind one stall, a man crouches over a pot, dropping in small strips of something dark. The smell is thick and unpleasant. When he notices you looking, he shrugs and says it is old saddle leather. He says it without shame. Hunger has stripped away embarrassment. As you continue your walk, you notice another group gathered around a fire, attempting to toast lumps of oat bran mixed with chaff. The mixture crumbles easily, scattering into ash when handled too roughly. A woman nearby tries to encourage her children by telling them it is a special treat. Her voice is gentle, but her eyes betray her worry. The children nibble bravely, trying to believe her. You pause at a cottage where a lone man sits grinding something between two stones. He wipes sweat from his brow, even though the morning air is cool. When you ask him what he is crushing, he tilts the stone so you can see. These are ground fern roots, he explains, mixed with the remnants of rye. He tells you quietly that he read once, or perhaps only heard, that people in distant lands survived hard years using such mixtures. His voice wavers with uncertainty, as though he hopes the memory is more than wishful thinking. The question of what people actually ate during the famine still puzzles many researchers today. Some argue that communities relied more heavily on foraged plants than traditional documents suggest. Others believe that many of these emergency foods caused more harm than good, irritating the stomach or providing little nutritional value. You sense the truth of those debates here, watching villagers chew cautiously, as if gauging whether their improvised meals will comfort or torment their bodies. Not far from the green, a boy waves you over to show you something he has discovered. He holds a handful of mushrooms, some brown, some pale, some mottled with streaks of green. He grins as if he has found treasure. You kneel beside him and gently warn that some mushrooms are dangerous. He shrugs, saying his family will take the risk. You watch him scamper off, and your chest tightens with worry. In years like these, knowledge becomes a fragile boundary between survival and sickness. A low wind sweeps through the village, rustling the thatch and carrying with it the faint scent of cold earth. You pull your cloak closer, watching as villagers reinforce pens with whatever materials they can find. Some use driftwood, others patch holes with old fabrics. A few whisper charms as they tie knots in ropes, hoping superstition might offer more protection than flimsy boards. She says people have forgotten how many flavors the world hides until hunger forces them to remember. Outside, a group of villagers stands around a collection of baskets. They are sorting through what remains of last year's apples. Most have rotted or collapsed into mush, but a few shriveled survivors remain. The villagers slice away the mold, careful to preserve even the tiniest usable pieces. The smell of fermentation hangs heavily in the air. Someone jokes weakly that they are becoming experts at finding the good parts of bad fruit. No one laughs for long, but the attempt matters. As you continue walking, you encounter a man who has resorted to grinding dried bean pods into a coarse powder, mixing it with stale ale in hopes of producing something like porridge. He tells you it tastes terrible. He tells you he will eat it anyway. Farther on, a young couple shells handfuls of dried peas, keeping the peas for tonight's meal, while saving the empty pods for tomorrow's broth. They explain that creating two meals from one is now a form of skill. You watch them work together in silence, their movements slow and steady. Hunger has made them practical, calculating, and heartbreakingly hopeful. The sound of a heated discussion pulls you toward a nearby cottage where two villagers argue over the safety of certain weeds. One believes they are edible, the other insists they caused her cousin severe stomach pains. Their argument swells, then breaks when an older man intervenes, reminding them both that fear makes people careless. He suggests they boil everything twice, just in case. One historical detail noted in various estate inventories returns to your thoughts. Horses, essential for ploughing and transport, were among the first casualties in bad years because they required large quantities of fodder. You feel the weight of that truth now. This single death represents more than one loss. Without the horse, a field will remain unploughed, a cart will remain still, a family will face a harder season ahead. By late afternoon, you step back into the marketplace and see a woman trying to sell a peculiar mixture of flour and ground tree bark. She advertises it as a filler rather than a full meal. Her honesty is refreshing. A few villagers buy it anyway. Hunger has a way of shifting expectations. As evening settles over the village, the smell of smoky, improvised meals fills the air. You hear pots bubbling faintly, their contents uncertain but essential. People gather closer to their hearths, hoping for warmth and the illusion of fullness. You sit near one of these humble fires, letting the steam rise around your face. The broth before you is thin, its ingredients are indistinct, but it is hot, and in times like these, warmth alone can feel like nourishment. You sip slowly, tasting the struggle in every drop. Hunger has reshaped the village's definition of food, turning ordinary plants, scraps, and discarded pieces into lifelines. And as the fire crackles quietly beside you, you know this is only one stage of a much longer story. You wake to a world washed in pale morning mist, the kind that settles low and clings to your ankles as you walk. The air tastes clean for a moment, almost gentle, but beneath that softness lies something uneasy. Today, your path leads you toward the forest, a place villagers once entered with purpose and familiarity. Now, it feels like both sanctuary and threat. Hunger has changed how people look at the woods. They approach them with a blend of hope, caution, and a quiet desperation that rustles as loudly as the leaves. You follow a narrow track leading away from the cottages. The ground is still damp from last night's drizzle, and your boots leave deep impressions on soil softened by months of relentless rain. As you step beneath the first branches, a cool darkness wraps around you. The forest greets you like a great shadowed hall, whispering in hushed tones only the wind understands. You hear soft footsteps behind you, and soon notice a small group of villagers walking the same path. They carry baskets lined with threadbare cloth, hoping to fill them with anything edible the forest might offer. One of the men nods politely as he passes you, his expression a mixture of determination and worry. You recognize the look. It is the expression of someone who knows the forest is no longer simply part of the landscape but a battleground between need and caution. Deeper inside, the forest floor becomes uneven, dotted with puddles that mirror the canopy above. The smell of moss is strong, its earthy sharpness mixing with the scent of decaying leaves. You crouch to inspect a cluster of mushrooms at the base of a tree. Their caps glisten faintly in the dim light. A young woman nearby watches you and warns that some species can sicken even the strongest stomach. She taps her basket, revealing a small collection of nuts, berries, and a handful of herbs. Her voice carries the steady rhythm of someone who has done this many times but still never feels entirely safe. Records from several monastic communities describe how forest foraging became a lifeline during the famine, though success varied from place to place. You feel the truth of that in every hesitant step. The villagers spread out among the trees, each searching for something different. One man examines fallen branches for edible lichens. A girl digs near the roots of an oak in search of acorns, though most have already been gathered, leaving only cracked shells and scraps of hull. A curious detail mentioned in a few scattered manuscripts returns to your thoughts. Some families roasted certain tree barks, scraping off the softened layers to mix with weak porridge. You spot a man attempting just that. He peels the outer bark carefully, revealing a pale inner layer that he slices into thin strips. He glances around nervously, as if the trees themselves might object to being harvested. You continue walking until the forest thickens and the air grows cooler, almost still. The deeper parts of the woods feel different, as though untouched by human hands for decades. Here, fear takes on a more subtle form. People whisper that the forest sometimes hides more than food. Wolves prowl closer now, following the scent of weakened livestock and hungry travelers. You hear a distant howl, long and low, and it sends a ripple across your skin. Not far from you, two men stand beside a snare they set the night before. The trap is empty, but the ground around it is disturbed, the soil torn as though a desperate animal fought to escape. The men exchange a tense glance. One wonders aloud if someone else took whatever was caught. The other mutters that foxes have grown bolder. The forest has become a stage for competing hungers, each creature, human or animal, searching for survival. You notice small signs that villagers tread here often now. Broken branches, worn paths, bits of cloth caught on thorns. Yet beneath those human traces lie older stories. People still speak of strange things seen in the woods on foggy mornings. Glimmers of movement, shadows that vanish between trees, lights that flicker without source. Some of these tales are old superstitions, revived by fear. Others may simply be tricks of tired eyes. A gentle debate among modern researchers continues about how deeply fear shaped medieval perceptions of woodland spaces during crises. Some argue that people saw the forest as a refuge filled with resources. Others believe the woods symbolize danger and the unknown, especially in desperate times. Walking here now, surrounded by silence and shifting shadows, both interpretations feel true. Farther on, you come across a small clearing where villagers have gathered. A woman kneels beside a patch of wild garlic that somehow survived the wet season, its leaves bright and fresh. She plucks each leaf with reverence, as though offering a prayer with every motion. Another villager digs for edible tubers, his movements slow and deliberate. He smiles faintly when he finds one, holding it up like a prized gem. It is small, muddy, and misshapen, but in times like these, it looks miraculous. A soft rustling catches your attention from the edge of the clearing. You turn to see a young boy holding a woven basket almost as big as he is. Inside, you see handfuls of pine needles and small cones. He announces proudly that his mother uses the needles to brew a bitter tea that eases coughing and fills the stomach, if only slightly. The tea is harsh on the tongue, he admits, but it helps numb the hunger for a while. As the group continues gathering what they can, you wander toward a stream trickling through the forest. The water runs clear, reflecting the pale sky above. A man kneels at the edge, searching for small fish or even frogs. He scoops the water with his hands, scanning for movement, his breath misting faintly in the cool air. He tells you that the stream used to be full of life during spring. Now, after months of rain, the banks flood unpredictably, and many creatures have been swept downstream. Nearby, an elderly woman picks through brambles, searching for berries long past their prime. She finds a few dark, wrinkled ones and places them carefully into her pouch. When you approach, she smiles softly and says that even old berries carry a whisper of sweetness. Her voice trembles with gratitude for such small mercies. As the day grows older, the forest dims slightly, its thick branches filtering the weak light. Villagers gather what they have found, comparing baskets. Some fared better than others. A few found nothing at all, but no one complains. Hunger teaches humility. Every scrap matters. As you walk back toward the village, The forest seems to watch silently. The canopy sways with a gentle murmur, as if aware of the burden it now carries. It shelters hope and fear in equal measure, offering life with one hand and danger with the other. You step out onto the muddy road once more, the trees fading behind you like a closing door. Your basket is light, but your heart feels heavier. The forest gave what it could, and you are grateful. But the truth lingers quietly as you head toward the village lights. Foraging may slow hunger, but it cannot stop the famine from tightening its grip. The sky darkens slowly, and a gust of cold wind brushes your cheek. You pull your cloak tighter and keep walking, knowing tomorrow will bring another search and another struggle. You enter the new day with a sense of heaviness that clings to your shoulders even more persistently than your damp cloak. The village is beginning to stir, but the movements you witness are cautious, subdued, and clouded by worry. Today you drift toward the market square, a place that once buzzed with lively chatter and bright displays of grain, fruit, wool, and the occasional luxury brought in from distant towns. Now, the square feels transformed. What was once a scene of commerce and comfort has become a space shaped by scarcity, tension, and the quiet negotiation of survival. You step onto the uneven cobblestones, their cracks filled with rainwater and old straw. A few makeshift stalls stand crookedly around the edges of the square, their coverings patched with bits of cloth and leather to keep out the damp. Merchants who once shouted greetings now speak in hushed tones, wary of drawing too large a crowd. Their eyes follow every movement, measuring intent, weighing risk. The morning light filters weakly through clouds and seems reluctant to settle anywhere for long. You pause near a table where a merchant displays a pitiful assortment of goods: a few handfuls of grain, a cluster of dried herbs, a pair of shriveled carrots that look more like roots scraped from a ditch. He taps his fingers against the edge of the table before offering you a weary smile. When you ask about prices, he sighs. He lifts one of the carrots. He claims it cost him triple what it did last year. According to several preserved town records, prices during the Great Famine soared with unsettling speed, rising far beyond what ordinary villagers could pay. You see that reality on the merchant's face, etched like a bruise beneath his eyes. Nearby, a woman holds up a sack of oat chaff as if presenting jewelry. You hear her explaining to a customer that the chaff can be boiled to make a thin gruel. It might taste bitter, she admits, but it fills the stomach for an hour or two. The customer hesitates, hand hovering over her purse. After a long pause, she buys it. Hunger has a way of simplifying choices. As you wander deeper into the market, you sense currents of tension flowing between the stalls. People stare a moment too long at someone else's basket. They whisper about prices. They edge closer to the displays, not out of curiosity, but out of fear that the last scrap of a particular item might disappear before they decide whether they can afford it. These subtle gestures feel louder than any shouting ever could. On one side of the square, a man displays several lumps of coarse rye bread. They look dense, heavy, and darker than the bread you remember eating in better times. A small crowd gathers. Their expressions carry a blend of longing and suspicion. Bread has become more than food. It is a fragile promise that life can still continue. The man breaks off a small piece and hands it to you. It is sour, gritty, and almost bitter. He nods as though expecting that reaction. He explains that the flour was stretched with ground bean pods and leftover husks from the bottom of a storage bin. You step aside to let others try a sample. One woman closes her eyes as she chews, as if savoring something precious. Another shakes her head, too embarrassed to spit out the taste. A man offers to buy half a loaf for a price nearly equal to a day's wages. The seller considers for a while, then agrees. You watch the transaction with a sense of quiet disbelief. Every exchange now resembles a small struggle between hope and necessity. A little further along, you notice a crowd forming around a stall where a foreign merchant lays out bundles of dried fish. He claims they come from the coast, caught before storms made fishing too dangerous. His voice is smooth, confident, almost theatrical, but you catch the flicker of fear in his eyes. He knows he stands at the edge of desperation as well. Dried fish like his often spoiled quickly in the humid air, a fact noted in a handful of surviving trading letters from this period. When he unwraps one bundle, the smell confirms that not all of his goods have survived the journey. Yet people still lean forward, bargaining for even the questionable pieces. A young man raises his voice at the fish seller, accusing him of demanding unfair prices. Others step closer, their faces tightening, breaths quickening. For a moment, the air crackles with the possibility of violence. Several villagers glance around nervously, aware of how fragile order has become. But eventually, the argument dissolves. The young man storms away, muttering curses under his breath. The merchant wipes sweat from his brow, his hands trembling slightly. You continue walking until you reach a small circle of traders who seem to be negotiating quietly among themselves. One displays a pile of half-spoiled apples, their skins wrinkled and bruised. Another offers jars of honey, though each jar is only half full. Honey has become valuable enough to cause suspicion. A woman demands to know whether the honey was diluted with water. The seller bristles, insisting it is pure. Others murmur, trying to decide whether to believe him. The tension between honesty and survival hangs in the cool air like low smoke. A curious practice described in a few scattered estate notes flickers through your thoughts. Some people began weighing their goods with small handmade stones to avoid disputes. You notice similar stones in use here. A merchant places one on his scale as he measures out grain for a gaunt farmer. The stones wobble slightly due to the uneven table, and a brief disagreement breaks out. Toward the center of the square, you find a small group of villagers clutching coins and bits of cloth to barter. A woman offers a wool shawl for a handful of barley. Another man offers his woodworking tools for a small bag of dried peas. He explains that he no longer has the strength to work with them anyway. The buyer hesitates before agreeing. People trade not only goods, but pieces of their livelihood, their skills, their futures. A little further along, you notice a crowd forming around a stall where a foreign merchant lays out bundles of dried fish. He claims they come from the coast, caught before storms made fishing too dangerous. His voice is smooth, confident, almost theatrical, but you catch the flicker of fear in his eyes. He knows he stands at the edge of desperation as well. Dried fish like his often spoiled quickly in the humid air, a fact noted in a handful of surviving trading letters from this period. You make your way toward the village green, where people have gathered in scattered clusters. Their movements seem jittery. Their breaths puff small clouds into the cool air. You notice the anxious dart of their eyes, the way their fingers twitch against pockets or bags. A sharp cry erupts near the old communal bakehouse, drawing your attention. You notice a faint argument rising near a stall selling tiny dried fish. Two men accuse each other of cutting the line or taking more samples than allowed. Voices rise, hands tighten. A few villagers intervene, urging calm. The moment passes, but the uneasiness lingers like a bruise. Moments like these, described in various court records from the era, hint at the strain many communities faced as scarcity deepened. Toward midday, a thin rain begins to fall, soaking the square in a fine mist. Merchants cover their stalls with cloths. Customers shrink beneath hoods and cloaks, but no one leaves. They linger, unwilling to give up their chance to secure something for the day's meal. The square feels like a fragile stage where every actor knows the script too well. Barter what little you have, hope the prices do not rise during the conversation, and pray someone brings news of food arriving from another town. You drift toward the edge of the market, where an older man sells bundles of dried nettles and ground thistle seeds. He claims they help strengthen the body. His voice carries weary optimism. You ask whether people buy them often. He nods quietly. Sometimes, he says, nettles are all a family has left to stretch a meal. He strokes his beard, then adds that these hard times remind him of old lessons. People rediscover the uses of plants they once ignored. As the day draws to its close, the square begins to thin out. Merchants pack their unsold goods. Customers clutch their baskets tightly, guarding every crumb. The rain falls in slow, persistent drops, blurring the outlines of stalls and leaving the ground slick. Toward the center of the square, you find a small group of villagers clutching coins and bits of cloth to barter. A woman offers a wool shawl for a handful of barley. Another man offers his woodworking tools for a small bag of dried peas. He explains that he no longer has the strength to work with them anyway. The buyer hesitates before agreeing. People trade not only goods, but pieces of their livelihood, their skills, their futures. A curious practice described in a few scattered estate notes flickers through your thoughts. Some people began weighing their goods with small handmade stones to avoid disputes. You notice similar stones in use here. A merchant places one on his scale as he measures out grain for a gaunt farmer. The stones wobble slightly due to the uneven table, and a brief disagreement breaks out. As you observe, you become aware of how quiet the children are. They hover near their parents, eyes wide, fingers gripping sleeves. One child stares at a pile of roasted chestnuts that look dry and tough from long storage. His mother gently nudges him away, whispering that they cannot afford them. The boy nods, already accepting this without complaint. Hunger matures children swiftly. You walk away from the square slowly, feeling the quiet weight of what you witnessed. The market has become less of a place for trade and more a mirror of the famine's relentless grip. You hear the soft tapping of rain on rooftops as you make your way back to the cottages, the sound matching the steady rhythm of your heartbeat. Tonight, the village will eat what it found, what it bargained for, what it could scrape together. And tomorrow, the market will open again, with fewer goods and heavier hearts. You hurry toward the sound and find a crowd forming outside the stone doorway. Inside, the baker's apprentice stands behind the counter, pale and trembling. He clutches a tray containing only a few hard, underbaked rolls. The usual smell of warm bread has been replaced by a faint, sour scent that speaks more of damp flour than of comfort. A woman shouts that the boy is hiding loaves in the back. Another insists she saw someone sneak in early and walk away with a full sack. A third demands that the rolls be divided evenly, no matter how small they are. According to several surviving village court records, moments like these became common as hunger grew sharper. Bread, once a symbol of daily life, transformed into an object of conflict. You watch the heat rise in the crowd as each accusation feeds on the next. The apprentice tries to speak, his voice cracking as he explains that the bakehouse received too little grain today. He swears he baked everything he could, but fear and hunger have a way of clouding logic. The tension swells like a storm cloud. You hear an older man mutter that if the Lord's stores were opened, there would be enough bread for everyone. Another villager hisses that such talk is dangerous. The man shrugs with a bitter laugh. Dangerous, he repeats, as though the word has lost its power. You step back as a scuffle breaks out near the doorway. Two men grab at the same roll, pulling it apart until crumbs scatter across the ground. A young girl drops to her knees to pick up the crumbs, brushing them into her hands with trembling urgency. Her mother pulls her away gently, eyes shining with shame and sorrow. You rest beside a weak fire, listening to the gentle crackle mingled with faint shouts carried by the wind. Hunger is no longer just a silent presence in homes. It is out in the open, shaping conversations, fraying tempers, and pushing good people toward desperate acts. As you move on, you overhear two women arguing fiercely over a missing chicken. One insists that the bird wandered off. The other accuses her neighbor of taking it. Their shouts echo across the square, sharp and painful. A small audience gathers, not out of curiosity but because conflict has become a kind of grim entertainment, something to fill the long hours of hunger. It leads you toward the chapel at the village's edge, a simple stone building with a sagging roof and walls darkened by months of rain. You make your way toward the village green, where people have gathered in scattered clusters. Their movements seem jittery. Their breaths puff small clouds into the cool air. You notice the anxious dart of their eyes, the way their fingers twitch against pockets or bags. A sharp cry erupts near the old communal bakehouse, drawing your attention. You continue along the path where a group of younger villagers stands near the animal pens. They whisper in quick, nervous tones. One boy claims he saw someone creeping near the barns at dusk. A girl insists she heard footsteps behind her when she fetched water late last night. The shadows around the pens seem to grow heavier as they speak, as if absorbing their fears. Not far away, you find a merchant packing his goods in a hurry. He has only a few items left: a bundle of old wool, a chipped bowl, some dried herbs. His hands shake as he ties the straps of his pack. He tells you he is leaving the village before things get too dangerous. You ask what he means, and he explains that yesterday someone tried to grab his bag while he was distracted. He barely held on to it. He glances around nervously, then hurries down the road without waiting to say goodbye. Toward midday, you hear a growing commotion near the well. You arrive to find a group of villagers accusing a young man of filling his buckets at night and taking more water than he needs. The accused man clenches his jaw tightly, reminding them that the rain has replenished the well countless times. The argument escalates quickly. Voices rise. Someone lunges forward. You instinctively step back as hands grasp shoulders and shove bodies aside. Eventually, the priest intervenes, raising both arms and begging for calm. His voice cracks under the strain. He reminds everyone that fear can make enemies where none exist. But the crowd disperses reluctantly. Their eyes do not soften, their muttering continues. Even after the priest steps away, the air feels charged, as though the argument might ignite again with the smallest spark. A lingering discussion among modern researchers focuses on how communities attempted to maintain justice during the famine. Some argue that local courts became more active, while others believe informal enforcement grew stronger. You sense the truth of both viewpoints here, watching villagers negotiate a balance between cooperation and suspicion, between the old rules and the new needs. As you wander toward the outskirts of the village, you notice a man sitting alone beside a hedge. His cloak is pulled tightly around him. He stares at a small loaf of bread cradled in his hands, the crust cracked and pale. When you approach, he looks up and confesses quietly that he found it lying outside a cottage. He does not know whether someone dropped it or whether taking it counts as stealing. His moral compass wavers visibly, trembling like a candle flame in a draught. Hunger has turned right and wrong into shifting ground. In the late afternoon, you hear the distant clatter of metal and return to the village centre, where two men are grappling with each other. One shouts that his grain sack was tampered with. The other swears he had nothing to do with it. The fight intensifies until several villagers pull them apart. One of the men spits onto the ground, chest heaving with fury. The other cradles a bruised arm against his ribs. The sun sinks slowly behind the clouds, and the village begins to quiet. But the quiet feels fragile, stretched thin across the tension that has filled the day. As you walk back toward your cottage, the soft glow of hearth fires flickers behind shuttered windows. People stay inside more now, wary of what the darkness might bring. Not far away, you find a merchant packing his goods in a hurry. He has only a few items left: a bundle of old wool, a chipped bowl, some dried herbs. His hands shake as he ties the straps of his pack. He tells you he is leaving the village before things get too dangerous. You ask what he means, and he explains that yesterday someone tried to grab his bag while he was distracted. He barely held on to it. He glances around nervously, then hurries down the road without waiting to say goodbye. You rest beside a weak fire, listening to the gentle crackle mingled with faint shouts carried by the wind. Hunger is no longer just a silent presence in homes. It is out in the open, shaping conversations, fraying tempers, and pushing good people toward desperate acts. The sun sinks slowly behind the clouds, and the village begins to quiet. But the quiet feels fragile, stretched thin across the tension that has filled the day. As you walk back toward your cottage, the soft glow of hearth fires flickers behind shuttered windows. People stay inside more now, wary of what the darkness might bring. It leads you toward the chapel at the village's edge, a simple stone building with a sagging roof and walls darkened by months of rain. Eventually, the priest intervenes, raising both arms and begging for calm. His voice cracks under the strain. He reminds everyone that fear can make enemies where none exist. But the crowd disperses reluctantly. Their eyes do not soften. Their muttering continues. Even after the priest steps away, the air feels charged, as though the argument might ignite again with the smallest spark. It leads you toward the chapel at the village's edge, a simple stone building with a sagging roof and walls darkened by months of rain. You see that truth in the priest's tired eyes as he raises his hands to bless the meager offerings gathered at the altar. A few coins lie scattered there, along with small bundles of herbs, a chipped bowl filled with thin porridge, and a hunk of stale bread. These tokens look almost symbolic, as though people want to give what they can, even when their own cupboards stand half empty. The priest murmurs a prayer over the items, his voice warm but fragile. You settle into a corner, letting the quiet wash over you. The candles flicker softly, casting faint halos along the walls. The villagers breathe in deep, steady rhythms, as though hoping that prayer itself might become a form of nourishment. One woman clutches a small wooden cross, pressing it to her lips again and again. Another wipes tears from her cheeks before they fall. Faith becomes a balm here, soothing wounds that cannot be healed with bread alone. Outside, a gust of wind stirs the chapel door, sending a draught that makes the candles dance wildly. A few villagers pull their cloaks tighter. The priest pauses, glancing toward the entrance, then resumes speaking. He talks of endurance, of compassion, of unity. His voice strains at moments, as if he is trying to convince himself of the same things he tells his flock. After the prayer, several villagers linger, hoping for counsel or comfort. One man kneels beside the priest and confesses that he snapped at his neighbor the day before. Hunger, he says, is making him unrecognizable. The priest listens patiently, nodding slowly, his fingers tracing the edge of his rosary. He assures the man that hardship reveals both shadows and strengths, and that forgiveness can still be found. A young mother approaches next. She asks whether the chapel has more barley left for the poor. Her voice wavers with hesitation. The priest hesitates too, and for a brief moment, sorrow darkens his expression. He explains gently that the chapel's granary stands nearly as empty as her own. He offers her a portion of the thin porridge from the altar. She accepts it with trembling gratitude. You follow her gaze toward the small chamber behind the altar where the granary door stands slightly ajar. You approach and peek inside. Your breath catches. Only a few sacks remain, each tied tightly with old rope. The scent of grain is faint, overwhelmed by the damp smell of stone. According to detailed entries in several monastic ledgers, churches often reduced their charity dramatically during the famine because their own stores could not keep pace with the rising need. You see that delicate balance here, the struggle between generosity and survival. Outside, a gust of wind stirs the chapel door, sending a draught that makes the candles dance wildly. A few villagers pull their cloaks tighter. The priest pauses, glancing toward the entrance, then resumes speaking. He talks of endurance, of compassion, of unity. His voice strains at moments, as if he is trying to convince himself of the same things he tells his flock. Witnessing this moment, you feel the complexity of that debate firsthand. As you approach, the faint glow of candlelight flickers through its narrow slits of windows. You push the old wooden door open and feel a wash of cool, incense-tinged air brush your face. Inside, the chapel smells of damp stone, wax, and something subtler, like hope that has been stretched thin but refuses to tear completely. Several villagers kneel on worn rush mats, their heads bowed, hands clasped tightly enough to turn knuckles white. She greets you softly and explains that the herbs are used to treat stomach cramps, fevers, and the weakness that follows days without proper meals. She works with careful hands, humming a quiet melody to steady herself. She also tells you that people have begun asking for more than herbs now. They ask for miracles. She looks down at the crushed leaves in her basket, then adds that faith must sometimes fill the gaps where remedies fail. Her voice carries the kind of gentle realism that comes only from witnessing both suffering and resilience. Back inside the chapel, a group of villagers gathers near a wooden chest filled with donated clothing. They sort through woolen shawls, threadbare tunics, and mended cloaks. Their movements are slow and respectful. In times like these, charity becomes both necessity and comfort. A woman lifts a patched cloak and presses it to her chest with relief. Another hands her child a small pair of mittens once worn by someone else's child. But the mood shifts when the priest announces that the chapel cannot host its usual weekly meal. A hush falls across the room. A few villagers bow their heads, others swallow hard. One man stares at the floor, jaw clenched. The priest explains that the stores simply cannot stretch any further. His words fall with the weight of finality. Back inside the chapel, a group of villagers gathers near a wooden chest filled with donated clothing. They sort through woolen shawls, threadbare tunics, and mended cloaks. Their movements are slow and respectful. In times like these, charity becomes both necessity and comfort. A woman lifts a patched cloak and presses it to her chest with relief. Another hands her child a small pair of mittens once worn by someone else's child. You can sense an undercurrent of frustration in the room. Not anger exactly, but the kind of quiet ache that spreads when even the places meant to provide sanctuary struggle to survive. A debate among modern historians still lingers over whether churches ultimately helped or hindered famine recovery. Some argue the clergy offered vital support. Others claim their limited resources and hierarchy constrained how much aid reached the poor. After the prayer, several villagers linger, hoping for counsel or comfort. One man kneels beside the priest and confesses that he snapped at his neighbor the day before. Hunger, he says, is making him unrecognizable. The priest listens patiently, nodding slowly, his fingers tracing the edge of his rosary. He assures the man that hardship reveals both shadows and strengths, and that forgiveness can still be found. You step outside and breathe in the damp air. The bell hangs silent now. A few villagers walk home slowly, clutching whatever small comforts the chapel provided. Others linger by the doorway, exchanging worried glances. You head back toward the village, the faint glow of the chapel shrinking behind you. Its presence still offers a kind of fragile warmth, even as its walls strain beneath the weight of expectation. The world feels quieter tonight, but not calmer. Faith is holding, but just barely. And as you return to the muddy path, you understand that even sacred places are not immune to the long reach of hunger. You wake to the low moan of wind sliding across the rooftops, a sound that seeps into your ears before your eyes even open. When you step outside, the world feels colder, harder. The sky hangs low and swollen with a kind of restless menace, as though it is deciding which punishment to deliver next: rain, wind, or something heavier. Today, the weather becomes a character of its own, shaping every choice people make, and reminding you just how small the village feels under the weight of the changing climate. The path beneath your feet squishes with each step, saturated beyond anything soil should endure. A sharp gust whips your cloak sideways, sending droplets from the thatched roofs into your face. You blink them away and move toward the fields, drawn by the distant groans of bending trees. As you approach the open land, the horizon reveals its scars. What once held neat rows of wheat now stretches out like a wet, tattered canvas. Pools of standing water shimmer under the grey light. Fences lean at odd angles where the soil has shifted beneath them. Several villagers stand ankle-deep in mud, trying to reinforce barriers built in haste weeks ago. Their hands tremble with cold as they hammer wooden stakes into the ground. One man curses softly as a stake sinks sideways instead of standing firm. He wipes his brow but only succeeds in smearing mud across his forehead. According to a series of early 14th century climate chronicles, storms during these years grew increasingly violent, often arriving without warning and wreaking havoc on farmland already pushed to its limits. You watch that truth unfold in real time as dark clouds churn above you. A sudden crack of thunder startles a flock of crows from a nearby copse of trees. They scatter in a chaotic burst of wings, cawing like omens as they vanish into the sky. A woman beside you mutters a quick prayer under her breath. She clutches her shawl more tightly, trying to keep the wind from ripping it away. Her hair whips around her face, and she squints toward the horizon, where the dark mass of another storm begins to gather. You walk toward the riverbank next, curious about the sound of rushing water. The river, usually calm and narrow, has swollen into a raging force. Its surface churns with a frothy violence, slamming branches and debris against its banks. The wooden footbridge nearby tilts precariously, half submerged. Two young men stand on the bank, arguing about whether they should attempt repairs. One insists the bridge can be saved. The other shakes his head, pointing out that the water rises higher each day. Their voices rise and fall with the wind, carried off before their words even reach the trees behind them. The air thickens as the storm draws closer. A harsh whistling begins along the tops of the reeds, followed by a heavy splatter of rain. You lift your head and feel the first drops hit your skin like cold taps. Within moments, the gentle tapping becomes a steady onslaught. The villagers scatter for shelter, cloaks billowing as they hurry toward barns or cottages. You take refuge beneath a half-collapsed shed near the fields. Rain slams against the roof, dripping through seams and forming small rivulets at your feet. The storm grows in strength, pounding the land with a relentless rhythm. Sheets of water blur the landscape into smudged silhouettes. The sound is immense, like distant drums beating against the earth. It is easy to understand why so many medieval communities interpreted weather as divine anger. A few surviving homilies from the era speak of storms that people believed were tests, punishments, or warnings. You watch through the cracks as lightning forks across the sky, its electric glow illuminating the drenched fields. With each flash, you catch glimpses of villagers running, clutching baskets or tools. The wind howls as though it wants to tear the roofs off the cottages. You hear a child crying somewhere nearby, her voice thin and panicked. A parent hushes her, though their own fear is clear in the shaking tone. The storm eventually begins to ease. The rain softens, shifting from a pounding assault to a steady drizzle. You step back onto the open path, blinking against the mist. Villagers slowly emerge from their shelters, faces drawn and pale. One man inspects his flooded field with a hollow expression. Another kneels beside a toppled fence, attempting to lift it, but his hands slip uselessly against the soaked wood. A curious detail found in a few lesser-known rural journals returns to you. During especially wet years, some farmers placed bundles of straw on field edges to divert water, hoping to protect at least a few rows of crops. You see remnants of such bundles now, half dissolved and drifting in the muddy water. Their once golden strands now look grey and defeated. As you walk through the village centre, the damage becomes more apparent. Barrels have floated from their positions. A shed roof has collapsed inward. The well water looks cloudier than usual, stirred by the storm's tremors. People inspect everything with anxious precision, checking for cracks, leaks, and signs of deeper problems. A few villagers stand in a small group, whispering urgently. Their words carry faint hints of larger fears. One mentions that bigger storms might be coming. Another says that in a nearby town, the river washed away two houses completely. A disagreement lingers in academic circles about whether these storms were part of a longer climate shift or a sudden series of extreme events. Walking among the broken fences and trembling trees, you sense the confusion of that era. People do not understand why the weather has turned so harsh, so unpredictable. They only know they must endure it. You continue your walk until the sky brightens slightly. The rain stops at last, leaving the village wrapped in a cold silence. You pass a cottage where a family gathers outside to assess the damage. The mother holds a piece of dripping thatch in her hands, shaking her head slowly. The father examines a cracked beam with a frown deep enough to match the weathered lines on his forehead. Their children stand close, their breaths forming tiny clouds in the chilly air. Elsewhere, you find a small group of villagers attempting to save their firewood. The pile sits soaked and heavy, logs darkened by water. They spread the wood out beneath a flimsy awning, hoping some of it might dry before nightfall. The smell of wet bark fills the air, mixing with the earthy scent of churned-up soil. By evening, the village feels exhausted. The sky remains a washed-out grey, but at least the storm has passed. As you walk toward your cottage, you hear the faint groaning of settling timbers, the land exhaling after being battered so thoroughly. You duck inside and sit near the hearth, coaxing a small flame to life with what little dry kindling you have. A monk, one of the few who live in the chapel's tiny adjoining quarters, approaches you. His sandals squish slightly against the wet floor. He tells you that last winter, the chapel fed more than 50 villagers each week. Now, it can barely help 15. He rubs his hands together for warmth, the sleeves of his robe frayed at the edges. He mentions a small tradition kept alive through difficult years. Tonight, the wind softens. The fields lie still, but the memory of the storm lingers, whispering that nature's fury is far from spent. You wake to the distant sound of footsteps on the road, soft and uneven, as though the earth itself is sighing beneath wandering feet. When you step outside, you see thin figures moving slowly along the muddy track that leads through the village and onward toward distant towns. Their cloaks hang heavily from their shoulders. Their boots are coated in layers of clay and silt. A monk, one of the few who live in the chapel's tiny adjoining quarters, approaches you. His sandals squish slightly against the wet floor. He tells you that last winter, the chapel fed more than 50 villagers each week. Now, it can barely help 15. He rubs his hands together for warmth, the sleeves of his robe frayed at the edges. He mentions a small tradition kept alive through difficult years. Today, you walk alongside the growing tide of people who have begun to leave their homes behind, searching for food, safety, or simply the hope that somewhere conditions might be kinder than here. Today, you walk alongside the growing tide of people who have begun to leave their homes behind, searching for food, safety, or simply the hope that somewhere conditions might be kinder than here. You greet the family quietly and ask where they are headed. The woman answers that they are walking toward a town rumored to have received grain shipments from a distant port. Her voice trembles slightly as she speaks the word rumored. Even she knows how weak that thread of hope might be. As the road curves, you see more travelers coming toward you. Some walk alone, others in small groups. Many carry nothing at all. A man and his daughter plod past, their clothes stiff with dried mud. He nods at you, his expression soft and resigned. The girl's eyes dart from face to face, searching for any sign of kindness. She clutches a wooden spoon in her hand, the only object she managed to save. Its handle is worn smooth, a reminder of better meals and a different life. You drift toward a small clearing beside the road where a group has stopped to rest. They sit on overturned buckets and tree stumps, sharing news gathered from the towns they pass through. One man says that in the south, grain is guarded so fiercely that even approaching the granaries risks punishment. Another claims that a northern village is handing out small portions of dried beans to anyone able to contribute labor. Their stories clash like uncertain waves, each one carrying the weight of both fear and hope. You notice a woman warming her hands over a small fire. She explains that her village lost half its livestock to sickness, and with no seed left to plant next spring, they had no choice but to leave. She offers you a piece of roasted root, shriveled and barely edible. You accept it gratefully, touched by her generosity. A soft smile flickers across her lips, as though sharing something restores a bit of humanity in a world that feels increasingly stripped of it. A curious survival practice mentioned in a few scattered merchant journals drifts through your mind. Some wandering families tied bits of bright cloth to their staffs or carts to help them identify one another if separated on long and crowded roads. You see such scraps now, fluttering weakly in the breeze, faded ribbons of identity amid the endless mud. Farther along, you encounter a group of young men walking with brisk steps. They carry no belongings except flasks, slung across their chests. They tell you they are searching for work, hoping to find a lord in need of extra hands. Their optimism feels slightly forced. One admits that they have already visited 3 estates, all of which turn them away. Still, their feet continue forward, driven by determination that refuses to crumble completely. As you walk, the road narrows and the trees grow thicker on either side. A hush settles over the group, broken only by the squelch of boots and the occasional snap of a branch. You feel the weight of silence press in. Many travelers glance nervously at the woods. People whisper that thieves hide among the trees, waiting for isolated wanderers. You sense the truth in their fear. Desperation can twist even good people into shadows. A soft debate among modern scholars lingers about the scale of migration during the Great Famine. Some argue that entire villages emptied. Others believe that movement was more sporadic and varied. Watching the steady trickle of travelers along this muddy road, you understand why the truth is difficult to pin down. People leave in waves. Some return. Others vanish into the landscape of hunger. You slow your pace as you approach a shallow stream crossing the road. Travelers line up to step across a narrow plank laid over the water. The plank shifts slightly under each foot. A child slips, soaking her boot, and begins to cry. Her mother lifts her quickly, whispering soothing words into her ear. The group waits patiently, sharing sympathetic glances. Hunger sharpens tempers in many places, but on the road, suffering often knits strangers together in surprising ways. Once across the stream, you notice several makeshift shelters built from branches and cloaks. Families gather beneath them, resting before continuing their journey. You hear quiet singing from one shelter, a lullaby offered to tired children. The tune is soft and fragile, like a thread of warmth weaving through the cold air. It reminds you that even in the darkest times, people cling to rituals of comfort. You spend a moment talking with a man sitting beside a broken cart. The wheel has cracked, and he lacks the tools to repair it. He tells you he salvaged the cart from his grandfather, who used it during a distant famine decades earlier. He laughs softly, though the sound is laced with sorrow. He wonders whether his grandchildren will remember these days too. His eyes drift toward the road, watching travelers shuffle by like ghosts in search of a home. As afternoon light fades into a muted grey, you find yourself at a crossroads where many paths converge. A large group has gathered here, trying to decide which direction holds the best chance of survival. Voices mingle in anxious debate. One man swears that aid awaits to the west. Another insists that the east has gentler weather. A third argues that turning back might be safest. No one knows which path is right. The lack of certainty wraps the group in a heavy stillness. You spend a moment talking with a man sitting beside a broken cart. The wheel has cracked, and he lacks the tools to repair it. He tells you he salvaged the cart from his grandfather, who used it during a distant famine decades earlier. He laughs softly, though the sound is laced with sorrow. He wonders whether his grandchildren will remember these days too. His eyes drift toward the road, watching travelers shuffle by like ghosts in search of a home. As evening settles, you follow a smaller group back toward the village. Their pace is slow and weary. They clutch their bundles as though afraid the night might snatch them away. A cold wind rakes across the road, carrying with it the scent of distant smoke and damp earth. When you finally return, the village feels strangely empty, as though part of its spirit has walked away with the travelers. You step inside your cottage, light a small candle, and sit quietly. The migrating footsteps still echo in your mind, carrying stories of hope, fear, rumor, and need. You wake to the soft sound of a child coughing somewhere beyond your cottage wall, a thin, fragile cough that cuts through the morning stillness like a reminder no one needs. When you step outside, the air feels cold enough to sting your cheeks. A pale mist hovers above the muddy ground, swirling around your ankles as you walk. Today, your steps carry you toward the homes where the smallest and most vulnerable members of the village try to endure the famine's grip. As evening settles, you follow a smaller group back toward the village. Their pace is slow and weary. They clutch their bundles as though afraid the night might snatch them away. A cold wind rakes across the road, carrying with it the scent of distant smoke and damp earth. You notice immediately how quiet the children have become. Their laughter, once bright and unpredictable, has faded into the subdued whispers of survival. You pass a cottage where a mother kneels beside her daughter, brushing a damp strand of hair from the girl's pale forehead. The little one's eyes are large and tired, ringed with shadows far too old for her face. The mother offers a tiny bowl of thin porridge. The girl takes a few slow sips, her hands trembling under the weight of even the small bowl. According to several medieval household accounts focused on child rearing, families often protected their children's portions even in the worst years, sacrificing their own meals so the young might live. You sense that sacrifice here, carved into the mother's weary smile and the hollow ache beneath her eyes. Farther down the path, you find a small group of children sitting together near a stack of firewood that has gone mostly damp. They huddle close, as though their small bodies might generate enough warmth to keep hunger at bay. One boy holds a carved wooden toy, its edges worn smooth from years of play. He moves it slowly across the ground, his motions sluggish. A girl beside him watches without speaking, too tired even to pretend interest. The world has squeezed the joy from their games, leaving only the faint outlines of childhood behind. A curious detail mentioned in a few surviving educational manuscripts surfaces in your thoughts. Teachers observed that during the famine, children's attention spans shortened, and many struggled to learn simple lessons because hunger clouded their minds. You see echoes of that truth when a father tries to teach his son how to tie a snare. The boy nods mechanically, eyes unfocused, fingers fumbling with the rope. He wants to understand, but every movement looks heavy, slowed by weakness. As you continue walking, you notice children lingering near the well. They do not play, only watch as adults haul up buckets of cold, murky water. A young girl clutches the hem of her mother's skirt and whispers that she had a dream about bread. Her mother hushes her gently, though her own expression flickers with pain. Dreams have become a currency, traded quietly in the dark hours of the night, shared like stories once were. You approach a cottage with a straw roof, patched so many times it looks like a quilt. Inside, you find an elderly grandmother sitting beside two small boys. She tells them a story about a faraway kingdom, where trees grow loaves of bread and rivers taste like warm milk. Her voice is soft but steady. The boys lean against her sides, absorbing the comfort of her presence more than her words. Storytelling, once a luxury, has become a shield against empty stomachs. The stories fill spaces that food no longer can. You approach a cottage with a straw roof, patched so many times it looks like a quilt. Inside, you find an elderly grandmother sitting beside two small boys. She tells them a story about a faraway kingdom, where trees grow loaves of bread and rivers taste like warm milk. Her voice is soft but steady. The boys lean against her sides, absorbing the comfort of her presence more than her words. Storytelling, once a luxury, has become a shield against empty stomachs. Outside another cottage, you see a father and daughter sitting together on a wooden bench. The girl's legs dangle above the ground, thin as birch branches. The father holds a cup of warm water, sweetened with a single crushed berry. He blows gently across the surface before handing it to her. She thanks him with a faint smile that glimmers like a timid candle flame. He watches her drink with an intensity that reveals his worry. When she finishes, he takes the cup and holds it close to his chest, as though the warmth might soothe him too. You wander toward the edge of the village where a widow is mending a torn cloak beside her young son. She works with careful hands, pulling the needle through the fabric with practiced patience. The boy watches intently, learning how to thread the needle and stitch along the frayed edges. She explains that he must know these skills now, because winter will be harsher than any before. Her tone is calm, but a tremor hides beneath it. Teaching has become a form of protection, a way to insulate children with whatever knowledge might increase their chance of enduring the months to come. A small anecdote passed down in folk memory drifts into your thoughts. During times of severe hunger, some parents created comfort bundles for their children. Small pouches filled with herbs, soft feathers, or smooth stones meant to soothe fear and distract from hunger. You see evidence of this when you notice a boy clutching a tiny leather pouch around his neck. When you ask about it, he opens it proudly, showing a single polished stone and a feather. He says it helps him sleep. His voice carries a fragile sweetness that nearly cracks your heart. As the day unfolds, you witness children adapting in subtle ways. One group gathers near the forest edge, searching the ground for stray nuts or edible leaves. They move quietly, eyes scanning the soil with practiced precision. Their small hands dig into the earth, sifting through roots and moss. Childhood curiosity has turned into survival instinct. His voice carries a fragile sweetness that nearly cracks your heart. As evening approaches, a soft drizzle begins to fall. Children retreat inside their cottages, their silhouettes flickering behind thin window cloths. You step into one home where a father tries to distract his sons by teaching them a song. The melody is simple, repetitive, and soothing. The boys sing with quiet voices, their tones slightly wavering. The father's voice, deeper and steadier, wraps around theirs like a protective arm. The candlelight flickers, casting warm shapes across the walls. The children lean closer to the flame, drawn to its small but confident warmth. You sit beside them, listening as the song fades into a soft hum. The room smells of damp wool and weak broth, but for a moment it feels almost safe. Night settles gently over the village, carrying with it a tired calm. You step outside once more, hearing distant coughs, soft lullabies, and the restless sighs of children drifting into uneasy sleep. Their fragility fills the air like a whispered plea. You return to your cottage with a heavy heart, knowing that tomorrow will bring the same struggle and the same quiet bravery. In the face of hunger, the children remain both the most vulnerable and the greatest reminders of why every villager continues to fight for another day. Night settles gently over the village, carrying with it a tired calm. You step outside once more, hearing distant coughs, soft lullabies, and the restless sighs of children drifting into uneasy sleep. Their fragility fills the air like a whispered plea. Hunger has stretched every bond thin, and obligations that once seemed manageable now feel like anchors dragging families toward exhaustion. When you reach the field's edge, you see a gathering of villagers clustered near a wooden shed where tools are usually kept. The tools look neglected now, their metal rusted from constant damp, and their handles worn from anxious hands gripping them in cold mornings. A group of men stands shoulder to shoulder, speaking in sharp, low tones. Beside them, several women clutch baskets nearly empty of grain. Their faces carry the long shadows of sleepless nights. A steward from the manor steps forward, holding a crumpled parchment. His cloak sways stiffly in the breeze. He clears his throat and announces that despite the hardship, each household must still provide its usual labor days for the Lord's lands, and if possible, even a few extra. His voice shakes slightly, as though he knows the reaction this news will bring. A murmur ripples through the crowd, a mix of disbelief, fear, and quiet fury. One man protests that his family has barely enough energy to tend their own soggy fields. Another insists he cannot give additional days when his livestock continues to vanish or die. According to several preserved manorial rolls from early 14th century estates, tension like this became common as obligations clashed with the sheer impossibility of survival. You witness that tension now in the tight fists and trembling breaths of the villagers. Their stories clash like uncertain waves, each one carrying the weight of both fear and hope. As you walk among the group, you sense the mix of loyalty and resentment twisting inside them. Some villagers bow their heads out of habit, unwilling to challenge authority even in desperation. Others exchange glances that hint at thoughts too bold to speak aloud. A lingering debate in historical studies touches on this very point. Some researchers argue that the famine weakened feudal bonds dramatically. Others claim that despite suffering, most communities still clung to the old order. Standing here, you can feel both truths alive at once. You wander toward the manor boundary, where a small group of labourers works reluctantly at the Lord's grain stores. They sort through sacks for anything salvageable. When one man lifts a sack only to find mould spreading across the top layer of barley, his shoulders slump. He mutters that the grain is barely fit for animals. Yet the villagers know they will still be expected to deliver their obligations in full. You witness that tension now in the tight fists and trembling breaths of the villagers. A small detail preserved in a handful of rural letters surfaces in your thoughts. Some peasants, when conditions grew too harsh, tried to negotiate with their lords, offering extra weaving, carpentry, or forest gathering instead of ploughing or harvesting. You see evidence of such substitutions here. A basket of poorly woven mats lies near the shed door, the weaver having worked late into the night to fulfill an alternative duty. Each mat looks rushed, its edges frayed, but it represents the villagers' attempt to meet expectations they cannot fully satisfy. Standing here, you can feel both truths alive at once. A small detail preserved in a handful of rural letters surfaces in your thoughts. Some peasants, when conditions grew too harsh, tried to negotiate with their lords, offering extra weaving, carpentry, or forest gathering instead of ploughing or harvesting. You see evidence of such substitutions here. A basket of poorly woven mats lies near the shed door, the weaver having worked late into the night to fulfill an alternative duty. A small detail preserved in a handful of rural letters surfaces in your thoughts. Some peasants, when conditions grew too harsh, tried to negotiate with their lords, offering extra weaving, carpentry, or forest gathering instead of ploughing or harvesting. You see evidence of such substitutions here. A basket of poorly woven mats lies near the shed door, the weaver having worked late into the night to fulfill an alternative duty. Each mat looks rushed, its edges frayed, but it represents the villagers' attempt to meet expectations they cannot fully satisfy. You follow a small path toward the Lord's fields. They stretch out in long, soggy rows that look no more promising than the villagers' plots. Several peasants attempt to clear drainage channels, but each scoop of mud fills with water almost immediately. A woman uses her sleeve to wipe sweat and rain from her brow as she works. She glances at you, giving a tired smile. She jokes that perhaps the sky should pay labor dues this year. Her joke fades into the wind without a laugh. You make your way back toward the village, where the mood is thick with resignation. The obligations have not disappeared. They remain, woven into the structure of life like threads that cannot be removed without unraveling the entire cloth. Yet hunger has made every thread tighter, harsher. As evening settles, you sit inside your cottage and reflect on the day. The tension between peasants and lord feels like a rope stretched to its limits. Still unbroken, but fraying, the fire crackles weakly beside you, casting shifting shadows along the wall. Outside, the faint shapes of villagers move about their last chores. The wind carries their murmurs, a blend of endurance and doubt. You close your eyes, knowing tomorrow will bring more of the same. Obligations will press on, strength will wane, and the bonds of feudal life will strain further beneath the weight of hunger that respects no hierarchy. You wake to a quiet that feels strangely heavy, as though the very air is holding its breath. When you step outside, the morning mist swirls around your feet, pale and thin, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and smoke from the night's small hearth fires. Today, your path leads you toward those who try to heal the village in times like these: the herbalists, the midwives, the wandering healers, and the people who cling to remedies passed down through generations. In a world where hunger weakens bodies and cold gnaws at bones, every cure, charm, and whispered belief becomes a lifeline, however fragile. You walk toward a small hut at the edge of the village, where an herbalist often tends her drying racks. The racks hang empty now. Only a few shriveled stems of thyme and mint cling to the strings, their colors faded by constant moisture. The woman kneels beside a basket filled with wilted leaves, sorting them with careful fingers. She greets you softly and explains that the rains ruined most of her herb stores. Still, she insists there is value in what remains. She holds up a thin root, saying it can help calm stomach pains brought on by the strange foods people now eat. Her words echo a pattern found in several medical manuscripts from the era, which describe healers struggling to treat ailments caused not by disease alone but by malnutrition and improvised diets. You feel the weight of that truth when the herbalist sighs and admits she has begun boiling the same roots twice to stretch her supplies. The second brew is weak, she says, but still offers a bit of comfort. Near the hearth inside her hut, a young man sits hunched over, gripping his abdomen. He winces as you enter. The herbalist prepares a mixture of dried mint and crushed charcoal, stirring it slowly into warm water. She explains that charcoal can soothe the stomach, absorbing toxins from poorly stored foods. The man sips the drink with trembling hands. His breathing steadies. His shoulders ease. The relief in his eyes is small but genuine. As you leave the hut, you pass a field where a midwife kneels beside a sick child. The boy's skin is pale, and his breaths come shallow and quick. The midwife holds a bundle of crushed chamomile, placing it beneath his nose while murmuring a steady, rhythmic chant. Whether the chant is prayer or tradition hardly matters. It comforts the mother, whose tears fall silently into the mud. A curious detail recorded in a few monastic healing texts drifts into your mind. Some midwives during times of famine tied small pouches of crushed herbs around children's necks, believing the scent could help ward off fever. You see such a pouch now hanging from the child's tunic. The small leather sack is worn and patched, but the belief it represents shines bright in the mother's hopeful gaze. You continue walking toward the riverbank, where a group of villagers has gathered around a wandering healer. His cloak is tattered, his hair streaked with grey, but his movements hold a practiced calm. He lays out a small assortment of remedies upon a cloth: a jar of honey mixed with crushed garlic, a handful of dried fennel seeds, and a tiny vial containing something dark and viscous. He tells the villagers that honey, even in small amounts, can ease sore throats and strengthen the weak. The villagers listen with a blend of curiosity and skepticism. You walk with him for a few moments, listening to the mule's wet trudging and the merchant's weary sighs. He mentions that prices have become unpredictable and that travelers whisper about entire regions cut off by soaked farmlands. One small anecdote he shares stays with you. He says some traders, desperate to protect what little food they carry, smear the outside of their sacks with pungent herbs to keep thieves and animals away. Moments later, you hear a heated discussion among several villagers standing near the healer. A man questions whether these remedies do anything at all. Another retorts that belief matters as much as herbs. Their debate reflects a wider uncertainty that many researchers still explore today: how much medieval healing relied on genuine medicinal practice and how much depended on cultural beliefs and faith. Walking among these villagers, the distinction feels less important than the comfort these rituals provide. You wander further down the path, drawn by the sight of smoke rising from a small stone structure near the forest's edge. Inside, a woman tends a cauldron filled with steaming liquid. A pungent aroma fills the space, sharp with the scent of boiled pine needles and resin. She explains that she collects pine sap and warms it into a salve used to soothe cracked skin and aching joints. The villagers call her a sap wife, a local healer who knows the forest as intimately as others know farming. She chuckles as she rubs a thick layer of salve onto her own hands, flexing her fingers as the warmth seeps in. A peculiar practice mentioned in a few rural legends comes to mind. Some healers placed warm stones wrapped in cloth against the stomachs of starving villagers, believing the heat could persuade the body into thinking it had eaten. You witness this technique now as the sapwife lifts a warm stone from near the fire and hands it to an elderly man. He presses it against his middle with a sigh, as though the stone itself carries a promise of relief. You emerge from the stone hut to find a group of children gathered around a makeshift charm tree, its branches decorated with bits of thread, small wooden carvings, and even scraps of embroidered cloth. A young girl ties a strip of wool to a branch, closing her eyes as she whispers a wish. A boy beside her tells you that each charm protects someone in the village from sickness. His voice holds the kind of earnest certainty only children can muster. These charms, though simple, represent another layer of healing, hope itself. She chuckles as she rubs a thick layer of salve onto her own hands, flexing her fingers as the warmth seeps in. As evening drapes a cool hush across the village, you enter the chapel once more. A few villagers kneel near the altar, their heads bowed. The priest holds a small bowl of blessed water, dipping his fingers and touching each forehead gently. You hear him whisper prayers for health, protection, and endurance. In times of famine, spiritual remedies become as essential as herbal ones. The villagers leave with softened expressions, as though the light touch of faith has given them the strength for another night. You return to your cottage as the sky deepens into a muted blue. The sounds of healing linger in your mind. Quiet chants, whispered hopes, the grinding of herbs, the bubbling of remedies simmering over small flames. These efforts do not erase hunger or hardship, but they soften the edges of suffering, giving people the comfort they desperately need. Tonight, as you sit beside your small fire, you reflect on the resilience you witnessed. Remedies may be weak, herbs may be scarce, but the human desire to heal, to mend, to soothe, continues to flicker like a stubborn candle in the darkest hall. As evening drapes a cool hush across the village, you enter the chapel once more. A few villagers kneel near the altar, their heads bowed. The priest holds a small bowl of blessed water, dipping his fingers and touching each forehead gently. You hear him whisper prayers for health, protection, and endurance. In times of famine, spiritual remedies become as essential as herbal ones. As evening drapes a cool hush across the village, you enter the chapel once more. A few villagers kneel near the altar, their heads bowed. The priest holds a small bowl of blessed water, dipping his fingers and touching each forehead gently. You hear him whisper prayers for health, protection, and endurance. In times of famine, spiritual remedies become as essential as herbal ones. You return to your cottage as the sky deepens into a muted blue. The sounds of healing linger in your mind. Quiet chants, whispered hopes, the grinding of herbs, the bubbling of remedies simmering over small flames. These efforts do not erase hunger or hardship, but they soften the edges of suffering, giving people the comfort they desperately need. A group of fishermen stands near a row of boats pulled high onto the shore. Their faces are windburned and tight with worry. Nets lie tangled at their feet, wet and heavy. One fisherman shakes the rope of a net free, cursing softly as he finds another rip along its length. He explains that storms have made sailing dangerous for months. According to several coastal parish notes from the period, bad weather during the famine years often destroyed boats faster than communities could repair them. You see the truth of that in the scattered planks, warped mast pieces, and broken oars lying like drift bones along the sand. The road to the coast is slick with mud and scattered with puddles that reflect the pale morning light. As you walk, the distant roar of waves grows louder, weaving into the steady hum of wind rushing over open land. The sky brightens slightly, though heavy clouds still gather in great heaps above the water. When you crest the final rise, the shoreline reveals itself. Grey sands scattered with driftwood, dark patches of seaweed, and the battered remnants of old fishing nets abandoned by storms. As you walk closer to the water, the wind grows sharper, carrying the taste of salt and the sting of cold spray. A young boy wades knee-deep near the shore, searching for shellfish beneath the surface. He lifts a handful of small clams, their shells thin and streaked. He says quietly that clams have grown smaller this year, perhaps because the sea itself seems unsettled. His father stands nearby, scanning the horizon with a furrowed brow. He mutters that the tides are changing unpredictably. A few coastal chronicles hint at unusual currents and harsher winds during this period, though no one then understood why. You watch the fishermen gather their morning catch, which consists of only a few silver slivers of fish. Their disappointment hangs in the air like sea fog. A man lays the fish carefully in a woven basket and tells you that the sea used to provide enough food for entire families. Now, he says, even the fish seem to be fleeing. Behind the row of boats stands a small wooden hut, where a woman prepares to gut and salt the catch. Inside, the smell of brine and aging wood fills the air. You notice the salt supply is nearly depleted. She taps the bottom of a wooden barrel, grimacing when only a thin layer of crystals rattles inside. She explains that storms have disrupted trade along the coast, making salt shipments rare. Without salt, fish spoil quickly. She gestures to a bucket holding the remnants of a spoiled catch, its odor sharp and unpleasant. Behind the row of boats stands a small wooden hut, where a woman prepares to gut and salt the catch. Inside, the smell of brine and aging wood fills the air. You notice the salt supply is nearly depleted. She taps the bottom of a wooden barrel, grimacing when only a thin layer of crystals rattles inside. She explains that storms have disrupted trade along the coast, making salt shipments rare. Without salt, fish spoil quickly. He tells you they have been boiling since dawn, and still only a handful of salt granules cling to the sides. She gestures to a bucket holding the remnants of a spoiled catch, its odor sharp and unpleasant. A curious detail noted in a few merchant journals now surfaces. During severe shortages, some coastal families boiled seawater for hours to create small quantities of salt, even though the process was exhausting and the yield tiny. You see a similar effort here. Outside the hut, a large iron pot sits over a fire fed by driftwood. The pot simmers with seawater, slowly reducing. A man stirs it with a long wooden paddle, his face strained with fatigue. She gestures to a bucket holding the remnants of a spoiled catch, its odor sharp and unpleasant. He tells you they have been boiling since dawn, and still only a handful of salt granules cling to the sides. Their debate spirals into frustration, carried away by the gusting wind. Beyond the cottages, you find a group of children searching the tide pools. They poke sticks into the water, hoping to find small crabs or edible snails. Their movements are slow, almost ceremonial. They cheer softly when one child lifts a small crab from the rocks. The crab waves its claws weakly before being placed carefully into a basket. Even the sea's smallest offerings have become precious. A question that historians still examine revolves around just how much the famine affected coastal regions compared to inland settlements. Some argue coastal communities fared better due to access to fish and trade. Others claim storms and maritime disruption made the coast just as vulnerable. As you stand in this wind-swept village, you sense the complexity of that debate. The sea offers opportunity, yet snatches it away with equal force. As you move farther along the shoreline, the wind grows wilder. Waves crash against the rocks with a force that rattles your bones. A group of sailors stands near a toppled pier, its beams warped and scattered by recent storms. They discuss whether another attempt should be made to send a ship north in search of grain. One sailor insists the journey is too dangerous. Another argues that they have no choice if the village is to survive winter. Before leaving the coast, you stand at the water's edge. Waves lap at your boots, cold and insistent. The horizon looks vast and indifferent, stretching beyond your sight. You breathe in the salt, letting it fill your lungs, and feel the loneliness of this place, the beauty and danger mingling in every gust. Tonight, the waves will crash against the shore, and the people will pray their boats hold fast until morning. You wake to the muffled clatter of footsteps on stone, and the distant echo of voices bouncing between narrow walls. When you step outside, the air feels different from the countryside's heavy dampness. It is sharper here, infused with chimney smoke, human breath, and the faint metallic scent of too many people living too close together. Today, Your path leads you through the cramped streets of a town, struggling just as fiercely as the villages, though hardship here takes on its own shape. A question that historians still examine revolves around just how much the famine affected coastal regions compared to inland settlements. Some argue coastal communities fared better due to access to fish and trade. Others claim storms and maritime disruption made the coast just as vulnerable. As you stand in this wind-swept village, you sense the complexity of that debate. The sea offers opportunity, yet snatches it away with equal force. You enter through a low stone archway that opens into a winding street, barely wide enough for two carts to pass. The cobblestones are slick with mud, and refuse washed in by last night's rain. People move carefully, stepping around puddles and debris. Children shuffle along the edges, their eyes scanning the ground for anything lost or discarded. A boy picks up a broken wooden spoon with the eagerness of someone who has found treasure. Hunger transforms urban life into a patchwork of misery and surprising bursts of ingenuity. A loaf of bread sits on a merchant's stall, but it has grown so hard that he must strike it with a mallet to break off pieces. He offers you a small chunk for an outrageous price. When you ask who buys such bread, he shrugs and says people soften it by boiling it with water until it becomes a kind of gluey mush. Even in this state, it sells faster than he can supply it. According to several fragments of municipal records from this period, towns often suffered as much as rural settlements, partly because so many mouths depended on trade. You witness that struggle immediately. A line forms outside a communal bakehouse where the city council has taken control of grain distribution. The crowd shifts uneasily, anxious for their portion. Guards with tired eyes stand nearby, clutching wooden staves more for deterrence than defense. You watch the fishermen gather their morning catch, which consists of only a few silver slivers of fish. Their disappointment hangs in the air like sea fog. A man lays the fish carefully in a woven basket and tells you that the sea used to provide enough food for entire families. Now, he says, even the fish seem to be fleeing. You watch the fishermen gather their morning catch, which consists of only a few silver slivers of fish. Their disappointment hangs in the air like sea fog. A man lays the fish carefully in a woven basket and tells you that the sea used to provide enough food for entire families. Now, he says, even the fish seem to be fleeing. You emerge onto a small square where people gather around a makeshift soup stall. The broth is thin, more water than sustenance, but the line stretches long. A mother holds her child close as she waits her turn. The child nuzzles into her shoulder, eyes drooping. The mother strokes his hair, whispering a story about warm porridge to keep him calm. You watch her face carefully as she repeats the tale with a soft smile masking her fear. Even in famine years, urban artisans often repurposed waste, turning refuse into tools or trinkets that could still fetch a bit of food or coin. As you continue, you reach a row of tall, cramped houses leaning slightly inward, as if exhausted by holding themselves upright. Laundry hangs from upper windows, dripping rainwater onto the street. A faint argument drifts down from one of the open shutters. You hear a couple debating whether to sell their last blanket for a sack of beans. Their voices rise, then soften. Eventually the window closes, shutting in their struggle. Down another alley, you find a gathering of apprentices and labourers warming their hands near a brazier. They trade rumours in quick whispers. One says a shipment of grain is coming from a distant region. Another insists the roads are too damaged for any caravan to survive the journey. A third swears he saw guards eating meat from the Lord's stores. Their stories clash and mingle, offering more confusion than truth. A soft question lingers among researchers studying these years, whether townspeople adapted more quickly to scarcity due to their trade networks, or whether their dense populations made famine harsher. Watching the faces around you, the uncertainty feels justified. The town hums with both desperation and defiant creativity. You turn a corner and stumble upon a group of children gathered around a musician plucking a battered lute. The strings are slightly out of tune, but the melody he plays is bright and lively. The children sway and hum along, forgetting hunger for a moment. The musician smiles at them, though his cheeks are hollow. When his song ends, a few children place tiny gifts into his hat. A smooth stone, a braided string, a wilted flower. He accepts each gift with solemn gratitude. Nearby, a group of older women scrub pots in a communal washing area. They murmur about a neighbor who collapsed yesterday from exhaustion. They worry about the cold nights ahead. One woman shows you a jar of salve made from animal fat and herbs. She says it helps ease swollen joints and cracked hands. She gives it freely to anyone who asks. You sense the quiet generosity woven through her gesture, a small defiance against the famine's cruelty. Farther down the main street, you encounter a gathering of town officials meeting beneath a wooden awning. They discuss rationing, price control, and how to handle thefts that have risen in recent weeks. Their tones vary, some stern, some weary, some defeated. Their decisions will shape the survival of hundreds, yet none of them seem confident. They talk about issuing tokens for bread, increasing patrols, possibly reopening abandoned granaries if repairs can be made. Farther down the main street, you encounter a gathering of town officials meeting beneath a wooden awning. They discuss rationing, price control, and how to handle thefts that have risen in recent weeks. Their tones vary, some stern, some weary, some defeated. Their decisions will shape the survival of hundreds, yet none of them seem confident. They talk about issuing tokens for bread, increasing patrols, possibly reopening abandoned granaries if repairs can be made. As the sun dips behind the rooftops, lanterns flicker to life along the streets. Their warm glow softens the hard edges of the day. You watch shopkeepers close their shutters. You see children coaxed indoors. Dogs curl beside doorways, sniffing the air for scraps. The town quiets, though not entirely. Somewhere a baby cries. Somewhere a pot bubbles. Somewhere two neighbors argue over whose turn it is to fetch water in the morning. By mid-morning, the constable asks anyone with information to meet him inside the old storehouse. You follow the group inside. The room smells of damp wood and straw. A young man sits on a stool, his wrists loosely bound before him. He stares at the floor with red-rimmed eyes. His clothes are torn, his boots caked in mud. Several villagers whisper that he was seen leaving the granary area too quickly. He insists he was simply searching for his lost dog. His voice cracks when he speaks. When you finally make your way back into the cool evening air, the sky has darkened to a deep, muted blue. The town breathes around you, tired but unbroken. Hunger presses on every doorway, yet people persist, stitching together scraps of hope from whatever they can salvage. You return to your cottage with a quiet ache in your chest, thinking of the children gathered around the musician, the artisans reshaping waste, the women offering salve, the men debating how to save their community. Tonight, the town settles into uneasy sleep, its narrow streets carrying both suffering and surprising sparks of resilience. You wake to a muffled clanging that reverberates through the morning fog, a metallic rhythm that feels out of place in the stillness. When you step outside, the village seems unusually alert. Doors open earlier than usual. People gather in cautious clusters, whispering in tight circles. Today, the unspoken truth becomes painfully clear. When hunger deepens, the boundaries of justice shift, and the world grows uncertain. Farther down the main street, you encounter a gathering of town officials meeting beneath a wooden awning. They discuss rationing, price control, and how to handle thefts that have risen in recent weeks. Their tones vary, some stern, some weary, some defeated. Their decisions will shape the survival of hundreds, yet none of them seem confident. They talk about issuing tokens for bread, increasing patrols, possibly reopening abandoned granaries if repairs can be made. You follow the sound of clanging to the village green, where a wooden post stands at the centre. A small crowd has gathered around it. The constable, a broad-shouldered man with a lined face, is fastening a broken lock to the post so it can be displayed as evidence. The lock belonged to a granary that was tampered with during the night. Though nothing significant was stolen, The damage alone has sent a ripple of unease through the community. As you approach, the constable lifts his chin, scanning the villagers for signs of guilt. His eyes flicker from face to face, not with accusation but with exhaustion. He explains that he cannot let such offences go unanswered. According to fragments of local legal records preserved from this era, petty crimes increased during the famine, not out of malice but sheer desperation. You see that reality carved into the villagers' expressions: shame, fear, and a flicker of reluctant understanding. A woman steps forward, her hands trembling slightly. She claims she saw a shadow near the granary just before dawn. Her voice quivers as she recounts the shape of the figure, the speed at which it fled. People listen with tense attention. Some nod, others glance nervously at their neighbours. Hunger turns suspicion into a steady drumbeat that never fully stops. By mid-morning, the constable asks anyone with information to meet him inside the old storehouse. You follow the group inside. The room smells of damp wood and straw. A young man sits on a stool, his wrists loosely bound before him. He stares at the floor with red-rimmed eyes. His clothes are torn, his boots caked in mud. Several villagers whisper that he was seen leaving the granary area too quickly. He insists he was simply searching for his lost dog. His voice cracks when he speaks. The constable turns to the small crowd, explaining he needs witnesses rather than accusations. He does not want to punish an innocent man. Yet he cannot ignore the damage done during the night. You sense the impossible weight upon his shoulders. Maintaining order is no longer a matter of routine. It has become a balancing act between compassion and fear. A soft debate emerges among the villagers. Some argue that mercy is essential in times like these. Others say that leniency invites more theft. Their voices mix, creating a quiet storm within the cramped storehouse. A lingering scholarly discussion touches on this very tension, whether famine weakens social cohesion or strengthens community bonds. Watching these villagers wrestle with justice, you can feel both tendencies wrestling beneath the surface. By mid-morning, the constable asks anyone with information to meet him inside the old storehouse. You follow the group inside. The room smells of damp wood and straw. A young man sits on a stool, his wrists loosely bound before him. He stares at the floor with red-rimmed eyes. His clothes are torn, his boots caked in mud. Several villagers whisper that he was seen leaving the granary area too quickly. He insists he was simply searching for his lost dog. His voice cracks when he speaks. By mid-morning, the constable asks anyone with information to meet him inside the old storehouse. You follow the group inside. The room smells of damp wood and straw. A young man sits on a stool, his wrists loosely bound before him. He stares at the floor with red-rimmed eyes. His clothes are torn, his boots caked in mud. Several villagers whisper that he was seen leaving the granary area too quickly. He insists he was simply searching for his lost dog. His voice cracks when he speaks. You walk toward the outskirts of the village, where you hear frustrated voices from a small barn. Inside, two men argue heatedly over a missing sack of potatoes. One accuses the other of sneaking inside during the night. The accused man clenches his jaw and denies it, his voice taut with indignation. They stand inches apart, fists balled. A third man steps between them, urging calm. The barn feels suffocating with tension, its air thick with the sour smell of rot and damp hay. As the young man pleads his innocence, you notice a child clutching the hem of her mother's dress, watching with frightened curiosity. Her mother pulls her close, murmuring that sometimes people do bad things because they are hungry, not because they are evil. The child nods slowly, processing the idea. It is a hard lesson for such small shoulders. Later, you pass a group of women carrying baskets to the communal oven. One woman explains that they must bake together now, so no one is accused of hoarding flour. She adds that this arrangement helps prevent misunderstandings, though it also means everyone's eyes are on everyone else. You hear the strain in her voice. Shared labor offers protection, yet it also strips away privacy and trust. He tells you that last night they heard footsteps circling the well shed, but no one was found. Whether the footsteps were real or imagined matters less than the fear they stirred. Later, you pass a group of women carrying baskets to the communal oven. One woman explains that they must bake together now, so no one is accused of hoarding flour. She adds that this arrangement helps prevent misunderstandings, though it also means everyone's eyes are on everyone else. You hear the strain in her voice. Shared labor offers protection, yet it also strips away privacy and trust. As evening falls, the constable makes his final rounds. He stops to speak with families, checking that their doors close properly, reminding them to keep lanterns lit and to call for help if needed. His voice softens each time he speaks to a child. Perhaps he remembers that justice is not only about punishment, but about reassurance, especially during nights when shadows feel too alive. The constable arrives, calming the crowd with a firm voice. He asks the merchant whether he counted the baskets carefully. The merchant hesitates, then admits he may have miscounted during the rush of morning trade. The tension eases, but only slightly. The merchant still glowers. The boys still tremble. Nothing is resolved fully. Everything simply settles like dust, waiting to be stirred again. As the afternoon deepens, you visit the manor edge, where the Lord's guards keep watch over the estate's granary. They stand stiffly beside the wooden structure, spears in hand. Their expressions are stern, though you catch glimpses of worry behind their rigid posture. Even they are not immune to hunger's slow erosion. One guard quietly admits that he gave half his ration to his infant son last night. He says it with a mixture of pride and pain. A quiet question occasionally raised among researchers lingers in your thoughts. Did the famine create more crime, or merely expose the fragility already present in medieval communities? Walking through the village today, you sense that both possibilities hold truth. Hardship strips away the layers people hide behind. It reveals fear, generosity, desperation, and compassion in tangled, unpredictable patterns. As evening falls, the constable makes his final rounds. He stops to speak with families, checking that their doors close properly, reminding them to keep lanterns lit and to call for help if needed. His voice softens each time he speaks to a child. Perhaps he remembers that justice is not only about punishment, but about reassurance, especially during nights when shadows feel too alive. You watch him pass, his silhouette fading into the dimming light. The village settles slowly into an uneasy calm. Some people lock their doors twice. Others whisper prayers. A few sit awake long after sunset, listening for footsteps outside. When you return to your cottage, the air feels heavy with all you witnessed. Fear and kindness walked side by side today, tangled like vines on an old wall. Hunger presses people toward choices they never imagined, and those tasked with keeping peace must navigate a world where every decision carries weight. Tonight, the village sleeps lightly, aware that darkness carries both danger and the hope that morning might bring steadier ground. You wake to the faint creak of wagon wheels drifting through the morning haze, a sound that stirs a quiet curiosity inside you. When you step outside, the sky glows with a pale, milky light that makes the world feel suspended between night and day. Today, the village feels expectant. People stand near their doorways, eyes fixed on the road, waiting for travelers who carry what everyone now craves: news. In these years of hardship, stories travel farther than grain, and rumors spread faster than sunlight across wet fields. You walk toward the crossroads where a small group has gathered. A peddler has just arrived, leading a weary donkey weighed down by a patchwork of bundles. His cloak is torn at the edges, his boots caked with layers of mud from dozens of villages. He greets the crowd with a tired smile, promising stories if not supplies. The villagers lean closer. Their hunger for information nearly equals their hunger for food. His stories blend weather, faith, and hardship into a tapestry that leaves listeners unsure where fact ends and symbolism begins. A murmur ripples through the crowd, blending hope and skepticism in equal measure. According to several old travel letters preserved from the period, itinerant merchants became crucial carriers of news during the famine. linking isolated communities in a chain of whispered reports. You witness this truth as the peddler clears his throat dramatically and begins speaking. He tells of a town to the south, where people claimed the rains finally eased. He says a trading ship managed to reach port there with sacks of grain, though no one knows how long the supply will last. A murmur ripples through the crowd, blending hope and skepticism in equal measure. You step aside as a second traveller approaches the group. He is younger, with bright eyes that dart from face to face. He claims to have passed through a region where the Lord has begun distributing seed for next spring, though only to households that can provide certain services in return. His tone suggests admiration, but a few villagers mutter that such generosity is rarely free. One woman folds her arms, stating plainly that sometimes news is less about truth and more about persuasion. You follow him briefly as he walks toward the chapel. He stops to share a tale with a group of children about a village that lit lanterns across its rooftops to ward off ill fortune. The children listen, eyes wide, imagining lights shimmering across the dark. When the friar finishes, he blesses them with a delicate gesture before continuing his journey. You kneel and tell her the truth. People believe many things when the world seems to be unraveling. Not far away, a man stands atop a wooden crate, waving his arms to gain attention. He insists that he heard from a traveling priest that distant lands remain untouched by famine. He claims entire fields of wheat stand tall and golden elsewhere. Several villagers scoff. One man points out that such stories appear whenever hunger grows intense. Still, a few younger villagers lean forward, captivated by the possibility that somewhere life continues as it once did. You drift past this scene and approach a pair of merchants arguing over the accuracy of their own tales. One insists the roads east are filled with bandits who steal livestock from travelers. The other claims the same bandits stole nothing from him and even shared a small meal by their fire. Their conflicting accounts draw a small crowd. People laugh weakly, grateful for the distraction, though the tension remains just beneath the surface. A curious detail noted in several preserved pilgrim diaries comes to mind. During difficult years, even holy travelers carried rumors shaped by their own fears and theological interpretations. You see an echo of this when a wandering friar enters the square, worn sandals slapping softly against the stones. He speaks of divine trials, of communities seeking forgiveness, of storms as messages. His stories blend weather, faith, and hardship into a tapestry that leaves listeners unsure where fact ends and symbolism begins. You follow him briefly as he walks toward the chapel. He stops to share a tale with a group of children about a village that lit lanterns across its rooftops to ward off ill fortune. The children listen, eyes wide, imagining lights shimmering across the dark. When the friar finishes, he blesses them with a delicate gesture before continuing his journey. Back near the road, you find a cart loaded with barrels and sacks. The carter claims he carries dried fish and coarse grain from a distant coastal town. Yet, when villagers ask to trade, he hesitates. He says he needs to save most of it for another settlement that promised him good coin. Despite this, he shares one piece of news freely: a rumor that a distant port is preparing to send ships inland with supplies once the river levels drop. The villagers cling to the idea, fragile as it is. You move toward the well, where a small circle has formed around an older man who claims he heard a prophecy while passing through a distant town. He says an elderly monk predicted the famine would end after 3 consecutive nights of clear skies. The villagers listening exchange glances. Clear skies feel like fantasy now, yet the whisper of prophecy settles into their imaginations. A young girl tugs at your sleeve and asks whether you believe such things. Every tale you hear feels simultaneously real and unreal, like smoke shifting in the air. The villagers weigh each story carefully. Hope is precious, but misplaced hope can be a heavy burden. As the sun dips behind the hills, a final traveler arrives, a tired man wrapped in a ragged cloak. His voice is raspy, worn from days on the road. He tells the crowd that a distant monastery has begun giving out alms again after receiving a rare shipment of preserved beans. His announcement draws a hush. No one cheers. Instead, they breathe out slowly, as though afraid their breath might break the fragile possibility that good news could be true. As night descends, you sit near your small fire inside the cottage. You replay the voices you heard today, the conflicting tales, the sparks of hope, the threads of fear. Travelers' words weave the fabric of how people understand their world, especially when the world feels out of control. You move toward the well, where a small circle has formed around an older man who claims he heard a prophecy while passing through a distant town. He says an elderly monk predicted the famine would end after 3 consecutive nights of clear skies. The villagers listening exchange glances. Clear skies feel like fantasy now, yet the whisper of prophecy settles into their imaginations. A young girl tugs at your sleeve and asks whether you believe such things. Tonight, the village settles into sleep, with stories swirling through dreams. Rumors are fragile, shifting, and uncertain. Yet for now, they fill the silence and guide weary hearts through the dark. You wake to a silence so gentle it feels almost unnatural, as though the world is holding its breath before revealing something it has kept hidden for far too long. When you push open your cottage door, the familiar chill presses against your skin, but something about the air has changed. It feels lighter somehow, less swollen, less heavy with moisture. As night descends, you sit near your small fire inside the cottage. You replay the voices you heard today, the conflicting tales, the sparks of hope, the threads of fear. Travelers' words weave the fabric of how people understand their world, especially when the world feels out of control. Every tale you hear feels simultaneously real and unreal, like smoke shifting in the air. The villagers weigh each story carefully. Hope is precious, but misplaced hope can be a heavy burden. According to several early 14th century climate notes kept by monastic observers, there were rare intervals during the famine years when the rain paused unexpectedly, giving people a chance to breathe. You feel the truth of that now. The air carries a faint smell of drying soil, a scent so unfamiliar lately that your heart tightens with recognition. As you approach the fields, you hear soft exclamations of surprise. A woman kneels beside a row of young shoots that had been nearly drowned days earlier. She brushes mud from their fragile leaves, astonished to find them still alive. They are weak and pale, yet upright. She laughs under her breath, a sound so rare it catches in your own throat. Her neighbors gather around her, touching the tiny shoots with reverence. The plants seem to whisper an ancient promise. Not all is lost. You drift farther into the fields and notice small signs everywhere. The puddles that once stretched like shallow ponds now shrink at their edges. The furrows, though damp, hold their shape instead of collapsing into soupy trenches. Even the air feels different. The constant weight of humidity has lifted, replaced by a cool, steady breeze that brushes against your face with surprising gentleness. A boy runs past you, shouting that the river looks lower today. You follow him to the river bank. The once raging water has calmed. Though still wide and swift, it no longer churns with the violent froth that devoured the banks weeks before. Stones that had been submerged are now visible just beneath the surface. A soft debate among modern climate researchers centers on whether these brief respites were part of natural variation or simply lucky breaks during an otherwise brutal weather cycle. Standing here now, watching the river loosen its grip, you understand why those early observers dared to believe the worst might be easing. You return along the path to find a group of villagers gathered near the old drainage ditch. The ditch had overflowed so many times that many gave up clearing it. Today, the water inside it moves gently instead of spilling over. A group of men stands beside it, shoulders straightening, as they consider cleaning it again. Their movements are hesitant, as though they fear raising their hopes too quickly. Yet they begin working, lifting shovels with renewed resolve. The scraping of metal against earth echoes like a quiet declaration of resilience. You wander toward the edge of the forest where you once watched villagers pick through desperate options for food. Now, the trees drip with moisture, but no longer shed torrents of water with every breeze. The undergrowth seems less drowned. Small birds, silent for weeks, chirp tentatively from the branches. You pause in wonder at the sound. A woman beside you whispers that she had forgotten what birdsong sounded like. Her eyes shine with gratitude and disbelief. At the village well, several people gather, laughing softly as they realize the water looks clearer than usual. One man dips a ladle and raises it to the light, inspecting its clarity. He jokes that perhaps the sky has run out of water to dump on them. The others chuckle, their smiles weak but genuine. It feels strange to hear humor again, as though speaking it might summon misfortune. Yet people laugh anyway, hungry for any sign that the relentless grip of the famine might finally be loosening. You walk toward the manor fields next, where the steward stands with a ledger tucked beneath his arm. His expression, usually tight with worry, appears less strained. He watches the villagers work and tells you in a weary but hopeful voice that if the weather holds for even a few days, they might salvage enough winter rye to prevent complete ruin. He taps his ledger lightly, as though afraid the sound might scare away the fragile possibility of recovery. A curious detail mentioned in a few rural letters returns to you. During fleeting breaks in the relentless rain, villagers often held brief gatherings at crossroads or churchyards simply to acknowledge the moment. You see something similar now. Near the small chapel, people stand in a loose circle, not praying, not speaking, just absorbing the quiet dryness in the air. The priest joins them, lifting his face toward the thinning clouds with closed eyes. You continue walking until you reach a small rise overlooking the village. From here, the rooftops appear less beaten, less defeated. Even the chimneys release steadier trails of smoke, as though fires burn more confidently now that dampness has loosened its hold. You sit beside a stone and let the cool breeze brush your cheek. The sensation is gentle and grounding. As evening approaches, the sky grows darker, not from a storm, but from simple nightfall. The clouds drift slowly, without the heaviness that once threatened to burst with every passing hour. Villagers step outside their homes, looking upward with a mixture of awe and caution. No one says the weather has changed. They simply breathe, long and slow, savoring air that no longer presses down on their lungs. Inside your cottage, the fire crackles softly, drying your boots at last. You listen to the night, waiting for the familiar roar of rain on the roof, but it doesn't come. The silence feels tender, almost intimate, a promise, whispered but not yet fully spoken. A curious detail mentioned in a few rural letters returns to you. During fleeting breaks in the relentless rain, villagers often held brief gatherings at crossroads or churchyards simply to acknowledge the moment. You see something similar now. Near the small chapel, people stand in a loose circle, not praying, not speaking, just absorbing the quiet dryness in the air. The priest joins them, lifting his face toward the thinning clouds with closed eyes. You wake to the soft glow of morning light slipping through your cottage shutters, a brightness gentler than anything you have seen in months. When you step outside, the air greets you with a crisp coolness that feels almost cleansing. You inhale deeply and sense something new mingling with the usual damp, the faint scent of drying soil. Today, the village leans forward into the possibility of renewal. The weather has steadied just enough for people to turn back to the land, to test whether the soil, exhausted but not defeated, can offer even a small beginning. Tonight, the village sleeps with a fragile hope tucked beneath its blanket of exhaustion. The famine still holds them firmly, but for the first time in a long while, the world above them feels just a little less cruel. According to a handful of manorial accounts from these years, communities seized every brief moment of stable weather to sow whatever seeds they still possessed. You witness this urgency firsthand. A man kneels in the furrow, scooping a handful of damp soil into his palm. He rubs it between his fingers and smiles faintly. The earth feels workable again, he says. Not perfect, but willing. According to a handful of manorial accounts from these years, communities seized every brief moment of stable weather to sow whatever seeds they still possessed. You witness this urgency firsthand. A man kneels in the furrow, scooping a handful of damp soil into his palm. He rubs it between his fingers and smiles faintly. The earth feels workable again, he says. Not perfect, but willing. You follow a group toward the manor fields, where the steward stands instructing people on how to divide the remaining barley, rye, and bean seeds. He uses a simple wooden scoop to measure each portion, ensuring fairness. His movements are slow and deliberate. The villagers accept their small rations silently, aware that every handful represents a fragile wager against the unforgiving world. According to a handful of manorial accounts from these years, communities seized every brief moment of stable weather to sow whatever seeds they still possessed. You witness this urgency firsthand. A man kneels in the furrow, scooping a handful of damp soil into his palm. He rubs it between his fingers and smiles faintly. The earth feels workable again, he says. Not perfect, but willing. You wander to another field where villagers debate whether to plant early or wait for one more day of clear skies. Opinions clash gently, not with the sharp edge of panic, but with the soft tension of people who care deeply about making the right choice. One man gestures toward the sky, insisting that the clouds look harmless. A woman shakes her head, warning that the soil needs one more day to firm. Their voices blend into the natural sounds of morning, rustling leaves, distant bird song, and the rhythmic scrape of tools against earth. A question often raised in agricultural studies of the medieval climate revolves around how quickly soil recovers after excessive rainfall. Some researchers argue that certain fields become usable surprisingly fast. Others claim the damage lingers. Seeing the villagers test the fields with their own hands, you feel the complexity of that debate. Some patches of earth appear pliant, ready. Others cling to moisture like a stubborn memory. As you walk, you notice children helping wherever they can. A girl carries a small basket of seeds, handing a few to each adult. Her steps are careful and precise, as though each seed weighs as much as gold. A boy follows behind her, dropping bits of broken pottery and stones into a larger basket to clear the soil. The children's faces reflect both fatigue and determination. They understand, in a way their young hearts should not have to, how much depends on these small tasks. At the far edge of the field, a group of villagers experiments with a new drainage trench. They dig a shallow channel lined with stones and branches, hoping to guide lingering water away from the young shoots once they sprout. One man remarks that he heard of similar trenches used successfully in a distant village. Another doubts the story, wondering whether it is just another traveler's exaggeration. Their discussion floats on the wind, carried between them like an unfamiliar tool they are trying to understand. A curious detail noted in a few rural household letters drifts into your thoughts. Some communities mixed ashes from hearth fires into the top layer of soil to help absorb excess moisture. You see a family doing just that. They carry small baskets filled with ash and sprinkle it carefully along the furrows. The ash leaves dark streaks along the soil's surface, like a painter's first strokes on a blank canvas. As you move along the fields, the sunlight strengthens slightly, casting a pale glow across the workers. You hear snippets of conversation. Someone remembers a harvest festival from years ago. Another recalls a relative who taught them how to test the soil by smell. Someone quietly wonders whether this moment of calm will last, or whether the skies will betray them again. You pause near a pair of elders sitting on a low stone wall. They watch the activity with a blend of pride and concern. One of them sighs and explains that even if the plants grow, the yield will be small. But small, he says, is better than nothing. The other nods, adding that the earth often surprises people when they least expect it. His words hang in the cool air like a soft benediction. Closer to the forest edge, a man tills a narrow strip of land that was considered too poor for planting in past years. He tells you that during times like these, no soil is too humble. He pulls the plough with steady effort, though sweat beads along his brow. His wife walks behind him, dropping seeds into the furrow with gentle, deliberate motions. Their youngest daughter trails after, patting the soil with her small hands. The family works in quiet harmony. their movements aligned like verses in a long-remembered hymn. As afternoon slides into early evening, villagers begin cleaning their tools and gathering near the field's edge. Their faces are flushed with exertion, but beneath the fatigue glimmers a faint, unmistakable spark, cautious satisfaction. They did what they could today. They coaxed the land back from despair, even if only by an inch. A few villagers stay behind, kneeling in the dirt. They whisper small prayers, pressing their palms gently into the earth as if asking it to breathe again. Their gestures feel intimate, almost like forgiveness offered between old friends who have endured a quarrel. As afternoon slides into early evening, villagers begin cleaning their tools and gathering near the field's edge. Their faces are flushed with exertion, but beneath the fatigue glimmers a faint, unmistakable spark, cautious satisfaction. They did what they could today. They coaxed the land back from despair, even if only by an inch. You stand near a low ridge overlooking the fields, watching the last rays of sunlight skim the soil. The land looks patchy and uneven, full of scars and promise. The scent of freshly turned earth rises around you, mingling with the crisp evening wind. It is a humble fragrance, yet powerful in its suggestion of tomorrow. You sit quietly, hands wrapped around a cup of warm water, listening to the faint sounds of villagers settling in for the night. For now, the fields are planted. The soil has been tested. The earth has been asked, gently and earnestly, to return life. Tonight, the village sleeps with seed beneath the soil and hope inside the heart, waiting to see how the world will answer. You wake to the steady hum of voices drifting from the village square, a sound richer and fuller than you have heard in many months. When you step outside, the morning light settles softly over rooftops and pathways, casting pale gold across drying thatch and cobblestones. Something in the air feels changed today, lighter, warmer, almost familiar. You follow the sound of conversation toward the square and discover a sight that sends a small, cautious flutter through your chest. The market has begun to stir back to life. The stalls are few and modest, but they stand upright with a sense of renewed purpose. A handful of merchants set out their goods carefully, as though afraid sudden rain might sweep everything away again. Yet no rain falls. The sky above holds steady, a muted blue hidden behind thin clouds. You walk closer, drawn by the faint scents of earth, herbs, and smoke that drift between the stalls. These scents feel like memories returning from another life. According to records from several recovering settlements of the era, markets often revived gradually as weather stabilized, serving as a sign that communities were ready to hope again. You see this gentle resurrection in every stall you pass. A woman arranges bundles of dried mint and sorrel. Her hands tremble slightly with the effort, but the smile she offers customers is genuine. She tells you the herbs survived on a sheltered windowsill, stubbornly clinging to life through the storm months. Nearby, a man sets out a basket of early peas. They are shriveled and few, but their green color stands out vividly against the dull tones of the marketplace. Several villagers gather around him, marveling at their freshness. The man explains that his field sits on a patch of ground that drained faster than others. Even he seems surprised by his fortune. You approach a stall offering small wooden spoons, carved toys, and repaired tools. The craftsman who runs it works steadily, shaping the handle of a spoon with careful strokes. He tells you that people are bringing him broken items to mend again, a small but meaningful sign that life is shifting from pure survival toward rebuilding. He pauses to examine a cracked ladle brought by an elderly woman, promising to return it by evening. The woman's eyes soften with gratitude. As you move deeper into the market, you notice the conversations that ripple through the square, people speak in quiet but hopeful tones. They discuss their newly planted fields. They recount the faint songbirds heard during yesterday's sunrise. They compare notes on the temperature of the earth and the clarity of the well water. Hope, it seems, has begun to weave its way back into their voices. A group of children plays near a barrel filled with rainwater. One child holds up a small piece of bread, marveling at its warmth. His mother stands nearby, explaining that the morning's baking used flour borrowed from a neighboring village. According to her, the neighboring village received a small shipment of grain brought in by a merchant passing through from the coast. Rumors of such exchanges spread quickly, reinforcing the idea that recovery, however slow, is possible. You continue walking until you reach the blacksmith's stall. Instead of a scowl etched by exhaustion, he greets you with a nod and a spark in his eyes. His forge glows brighter today, the flame steadier. He lifts a newly shaped blade, its edges reflecting the morning light, and explains that people have begun requesting tools again instead of trading them for food. He holds the blade carefully, as though it symbolizes more than its function. A curious practice mentioned in a few urban letters echoes at one corner of the market, where women gather to exchange tiny handfuls of grain. They call it a sharing circle. Each woman brings whatever she can spare and redistributes it among the others. The portions are small, but the act itself holds tremendous weight. Their soft murmurs and gentle smiles form a fragile but powerful kind of fellowship. You continue walking until you reach the blacksmith's stall. Instead of a scowl etched by exhaustion, he greets you with a nod and a spark in his eyes. His forge glows brighter today, the flame steadier. He lifts a newly shaped blade, its edges reflecting the morning light, and explains that people have begun requesting tools again instead of trading them for food. He holds the blade carefully, as though it symbolizes more than its function. As you make your way toward the far side of the square, you pass a group of men discussing the idea of sending a few villagers to nearby towns to trade goods. They argue gently about the best route and whether the roads have dried enough for safe travel. Their debate lacks the sharpness of earlier months. Instead, it carries curiosity and tentative optimism. A soft question often raised among historians deals with how communities rebuild trust after periods of scarcity. Some claim trust returns slowly, while others argue it resurges quickly once external conditions improve. Watching these villagers speak, barter, and lean closer in conversation, you sense both truths at play. Trust is fragile, but it gathers momentum once people dare to hope. You wander past a newly reopened bakery where the baker kneads dough with steady movements. The dough looks modest, stretched thin with substitutes, but the scent drifting from the small oven is unmistakable. Bread. Warm, fragrant, imperfect bread. You watch as the baker's apprentice pulls a loaf from the oven and sets it on the counter. Steam rises from its crust in thin wisps. For a moment, the scene feels like a memory from before the famine. You approach the loaf and notice tiny flecks of ground herbs mixed into the dough. The baker explains that these herbs help stretch the flour and add flavor. He says people appreciate the creativity. They understand the limitations. They are simply grateful for something warm to share. At the edge of the market, a woman sits beneath a patch of sunlight, spinning wool. Her spindle twirls rhythmically, catching glimmers of light as it moves. She hums a quiet tune, her foot tapping gently. Children gather around her, fascinated by the spinning wool. She smiles at them and tells stories about past harvest festivals, weaving threads of memory into the hall of her craft. You approach the loaf and notice tiny flecks of ground herbs mixed into the dough. The baker explains that these herbs help stretch the flour and add flavor. He says people appreciate the creativity. They understand the limitations. They are simply grateful for something warm to share. You take a moment to absorb the scene around you. The square once felt like an echoing hollow, haunted by scarcity. Now, it is filled with sound, quiet laughter, gentle haggling, the thump of boots on drying cobblestones, the hiss of steam rising from baked bread. Even the wind feels warmer, swirling lazily through stalls and carrying the faintest hint of spring. You return to your cottage with the faint scent of baked bread still lingering in your hair and clothes. Inside, the fire glows gently, steady as the new steadiness in the air outside. You sit near it, letting the warmth seep into your bones. You take a moment to absorb the scene around you. The square once felt like an echoing hollow, haunted by scarcity. Now, It is filled with sound, quiet laughter, gentle haggling, the thump of boots on drying cobblestones, the hiss of steam rising from baked bread. Even the wind feels warmer, swirling lazily through stalls and carrying the faintest hint of spring. Tonight, the village rests with full hearts, if not full bellies. Not enough has changed to claim victory, but enough has shifted to breathe again, to smile again, to imagine again. The market has reopened, small and shaky, but alive. And where there is trade, there is connection. Where there is connection, hope finds a foothold. You wake to a faint ache in your legs, the kind that comes from walking long distances over soft ground, but it is the quiet outside that holds your attention. When you step from your cottage, the village feels wrapped in a hushed stillness. The air carries the scent of damp thatch, turned earth, and something subtler, the smell of change settling slowly into place. Today, you walk not to fields or markets, but through the memories etched into the land itself, the places where scars linger long after the famine's harshest days have passed. You begin at the banks of the river, where the water now glides more gently than before, yet the earth along the edge tells a different story. Deep gouges mark the places where floods tore away topsoil. Tree roots twist upward in tangled shapes, exposed like skeletal fingers. A man kneels in the mud, touching the stripped earth with quiet sorrow. He tells you that this section of riverbank once produced sturdy willow branches for basket making. Now, the river flows too hungrily, claiming more land each season. His voice is steady, but you can hear the weight of loss in every syllable. According to a few rural accounts written years after the famine, landscapes across many regions bore long-lasting wounds. Fields thinned, ditches warped, hillsides eroded. You see signs of those same wounds here. As you walk, the ground feels uneven beneath your boots, shaped by water, footsteps, and despair. You make your way toward a field where last year's crops drowned. The soil remains darker than surrounding plots, still holding more moisture than it should. A woman stands at its edge, arms folded, her gaze steady. She calls this patch the heavy land now, no longer trusting it to yield grain. She remembers when her husband planted barley here every spring. She remembers how the birds used to gather along the edges to hunt insects. Now, even the birds seem to know better than to linger. You continue toward a copse of trees that once served as an informal gathering place for villagers during festivals. The trees stand taller than ever but more haggard. Branches hang low, heavy with moss. The clearing beneath them feels strangely empty. No trampled grass, no signs of laughter or dancing. A quiet debate mentioned in a few monastic reflections suggests that community spaces often transformed after famines, reshaped by grief and caution. Standing here now, you feel that truths settle into your bones. A few steps farther, you find the remnants of a small shelter built during the worst weeks of the storms. Its roof has collapsed, its walls half sunken into the mud. A child's carved toy rests near one corner, softened by rain and time. You crouch and pick it up gently, brushing away dirt. It is a small horse with uneven legs. Perhaps it belonged to a family who fled. Perhaps it was left behind deliberately. You set it back where you found it, letting it continue its quiet vigil. As you walk closer to the forest's edge, you notice changes there as well. Several trees lean at odd angles, their roots disturbed by months of softened soil. A hunter meets you on the path, shaking his head when you ask about game. The animals, he says, have grown unpredictable. Some have vanished into deeper woods. Others wander closer to the village than ever before. He cannot tell whether the forest is healing or simply shifting. His uncertainty echoes in the hush between you. You continue toward a copse of trees that once served as an informal gathering place for villagers during festivals. The trees stand taller than ever but more haggard. Branches hang low, heavy with moss. The clearing beneath them feels strangely empty. No trampled grass, no signs of laughter or dancing. A quiet debate mentioned in a few monastic reflections suggests that community spaces often transformed after famines, reshaped by grief and caution. Her voice trembles for only a moment before she steadies herself and continues. You reach a small pond fed by rainwater and runoff. Its surface is calm today, reflecting the pale sky. But along the banks, you see layers of silt piled high, remnants of storms that once sent waves of muddy water rushing through the valley. Reeds struggle to grow through the thick sediment. Frogs sit silently on the edges, their croaks subdued. The pond feels both peaceful and tired, as though it still remembers the violence that shaped it. Farther down the ridge, the land bears the imprint of footpaths worn by travelers who fled during the famine. These paths cut through undergrowth in a weaving pattern, threads left behind by desperate feet. They grow fainter with each passing week, yet they remain visible if you know where to look. A villager walking beside you pauses to trace one with the toe of her boot. She whispers that she lost her sister on that road. Her voice trembles for only a moment before she steadies herself and continues. Standing here now, you feel that truth settle into your bones. You leave the granary and climb a small rise overlooking the village. From here, the landscape spreads out before you. Fields marred by water scars, cottages patched with mismatched thatch, trees leaning awkwardly after months of storms. Yet amid the scars are signs of quiet persistence. Thin smoke curls from chimneys. Tools shine where they have been freshly cleaned. The faint green shimmer of new shoots dots the darker soil. A curious detail found in a few obscure land surveys from the period returns to your thoughts. Some fields remained barren for years because the floodwaters had buried them under fine layers of nutrient, poor sand. You find such a patch now. A square of pale soil sits like a scar among healthier plots. A farmer stands nearby, leaning on his spade. He tells you he has tried planting there twice. Nothing grows. He shrugs with resignation. Not every part of the land wishes to come back, he says. As the afternoon light softens, you walk back toward the village paths lined with stones washed clean by last week's calm weather. Children draw in the dirt with sticks, tracing shapes that look like fields and houses. Their laughter floats softly across the space, timid but real. The sound brings warmth to the cool air. When you finally return to your cottage, you close the door behind you and lean against it for a moment, feeling the lingering hum of what you witnessed. The scars remain, etched into earth and memory alike. But they no longer speak only of loss. They speak of endurance, of lessons learned in hardship, of places that will not forget, but will continue. Tonight, the village settles under a sky that holds steady, neither threatening nor promising, simply present, and that is enough. For healing begins not with perfection, but with steadiness, with acknowledgement, with the slow reclaiming of battered ground. You wake before dawn, stirred by a softness in the air that feels almost unreal. When you rise and step outside, the sky above the village glows with a pale, blushing light. It is the kind of light that hints at warmth without yet offering it, the kind of light that makes you stop, breathe in slowly, and recognize that something within you has shifted. Today, you walk through a world still marked by hardship, but no longer defined solely by it. The famine's grip remains present, yet loosened, as though the land itself has exhaled for the first time in years. When you finally return to your cottage, you close the door behind you and lean against it for a moment, feeling the lingering hum of what you witnessed. The scars remain, etched into earth and memory alike. But they no longer speak only of loss. They speak of endurance, of lessons learned in hardship, of places that will not forget, but will continue. Villagers gather near the furrows, examining the first cluster of sprouts pushing through the soil. These sprouts are pale, weak, and uneven, yet unmistakably alive. A woman kneels beside a row of them, tracing the fragile stems with trembling fingertips. She whispers that she never thought she would see new growth again. Her voice catches on the memory of months spent watching fields drown and rot. But now, the soil answers her touch with promise. You continue walking until you reach the river, where the water flows with a calm consistency. It no longer gnashes at its banks. Children stand on the shore, tossing small pebbles into the current. Their stones make soft plunks, sending ripples across the surface. One child points eagerly at a patch of reeds regaining their color. He tells you he wants to weave baskets with them when they grow tall again. His mother stands behind him, smiling faintly, as though afraid her smile might startle the fragile peace of the morning. A few elders walk together along the edge of the village, leaning on walking sticks worn smooth by years of use. They speak quietly about past seasons, comparing this moment with earlier recoveries they witnessed in their youth. One elder recalls a year when frost destroyed half the harvest, and how the village rebuilt slowly, patiently. Another mentions a time when livestock sickness ravaged the barns, yet the community pulled through. Their memories form a tapestry of endurance stretching across decades. Listening to them, you sense the continuity of human resilience threading through generations. According to some of the surviving reflections written long after this famine, recovery was never a sudden turning. It was a mosaic of small mercies: a day without rain, a loaf that stretched a bit farther, a sprout pushing through exhausted soil. You feel that mosaic forming now, piece by small piece, as you walk through the village. You pass the blacksmith's forge, where the flame burns brighter than it has in months. The smith lifts a metal bar from the coals and hammers it with renewed strength. The ring of metal carries across the village like a heartbeat. Nearby, a young apprentice grins when he manages to lift a tool he once struggled to hold. He attributes his new strength to the slightly improved meals he has had these last few days. Even the smallest nourishment changes everything. On the far side of the village, a group of women repair a cottage roof together. They pass bundles of straw and wooden pegs up a ladder, laughing softly when one of the bundles slips and lands harmlessly in a pile of grass. Their laughter feels warm, unforced. A return of something that had nearly vanished. A woman wiping her forehead with her sleeve turns to you and says that after months of fear, even small accidents feel gentle compared to what they lived through. You pass the blacksmith's forge, where the flame burns brighter than it has in months. The smith lifts a metal bar from the coals and hammers it with renewed strength. The ring of metal carries across the village like a heartbeat. Nearby, a young apprentice grins when he manages to lift a tool he once struggled to hold. He attributes his new strength to the slightly improved meals he has had these last few days. Even the smallest nourishment changes everything. You pass the blacksmith's forge, where the flame burns brighter than it has in months. The smith lifts a metal bar from the coals and hammers it with renewed strength. The ring of metal carries across the village like a heartbeat. Nearby, a young apprentice grins when he manages to lift a tool he once struggled to hold. He attributes his new strength to the slightly improved meals he has had these last few days. Even the smallest nourishment changes everything. You walk among the cottages, noting how people have begun sweeping their thresholds again, shaking out blankets, stitching torn garments with steadier hands. Children draw patterns in the dirt with sticks. Dogs wag their tails with more enthusiasm. Even the wind feels less burdened, lifting loose strands of hair from your face with a mild, playful sweep. A question often raised in historical circles considers how communities overcame the emotional weight of famine once the physical threat began to retreat. Some writings suggest that healing required years. Others claim that hope rose quickly, seizing any excuse to return. Watching these villagers, you can feel the truth shimmering between these perspectives. People are cautious, still tender from loss, yet their hearts lean naturally toward renewal. You make your way toward a meadow where sheep graze on patches of fresh growth. A shepherd walks among them, tapping his staff lightly on the ground. He explains that the animals are still thin, but they are eating with more eagerness now. He hopes their wool will grow thick again by autumn. You watch as a lamb nuzzles its mother, tail twitching with renewed energy. The shepherd smiles at the sight, and for once the smile rests easily on his face. As the afternoon stretches into evening, the sky softens into shades of lavender and rose. Villagers gather outside the chapel, not for urgent prayers of survival, but for a simple moment of togetherness. Some sing in low, wavering harmonies. Others listen quietly, letting the sound fill the spaces left hollow by months of fear. The priest stands at the doorway with a warm expression, offering blessings that feel more like gratitude than plea. Night descends slowly, without the threat it once carried. People drift back to their homes, steps unhurried. Children yawn against their parents' shoulders. Dogs curl at cottage thresholds. A soft quiet settles across the village, peaceful rather than expectant. You return to your cottage where the fire glows steadily. You sit on a low stool and let the warmth seep through your palms. The world outside holds its breath again, but this time in gentleness, not dread. Tonight, the village sleeps beneath a sky, washed clean, hearts still healing yet undeniably hopeful. The famine's scars remain, but they do not overshadow the fragile strength rising from the earth, from the people, from the simple act of breathing without fear. And as the night deepens, you listen to the soft murmur of the wind and feel the dawn of something brighter stirring just beyond the horizon. You sit on a small wooden bench near the square, watching lanterns flicker to life. Their glow wavers gently, casting gold across paths, doorframes, and the soft outlines of familiar faces. The air cools, but not sharply. A woman passes you carrying a small pot of stew. She offers you a taste, smiling when you nod. The broth is thin, but it warms your chest, spreading comfort through your limbs. Let your shoulders ease, releasing the last tension they hold. Picture the fields resting under a sky sprinkled with soft starlight, each fragile sprout tucked into the earth like a promise waiting quietly for dawn. The river moves with a slow, steady rhythm, its surface smooth and peaceful, guiding your thoughts into gentler currents. Every corner of the village you visited has grown quiet, each cottage glowing softly from within, each family breathing together in the tender calm of night. You may imagine yourself near the edge of the fields, a soft breeze brushing past, carrying with it the faint murmur of hope renewed. The hardships you witnessed linger only as echoes now, softened by time, shaped into stories held gently by the land. Feel the weight of those stories drift away from you, replaced with a warmth that settles gently in your chest. Allow your thoughts to loosen, drifting like leaves carried on a slow-moving current. Each breath guides you deeper into rest. Each exhale releases the day. The night wraps around you now, soft and steady, welcoming you into its quiet embrace. Sweet dreams.